the happy consumer.
Okay.
You probably said this already. Where are you calling in from, Congressman?
I'm in Manchester.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm at my home.
Okay, fantastic. You ready for this to be over?
Well, I think, I think most people in the country are hoping we can bring this to a conclusion that allows us to be able to come together and address challenges in a more productive manner. So let's hope that's where we end up at the end of this.
Would be good.
In addition to these, are there any other modes of campaigning that you are using other than hours and hours of Zooms?
Well, we're actually getting out there a little bit. Yesterday, we did a socially distanced event in someone's backyard with Senator Shaheen over in Exeter. We've done a few of those. It's still nice out, so it's a great opportunity to get people together and do it in a responsible way. Our campaign team they haven't been doing door to door where they're sort of having conversations, but they've been dropping literature off at people's homes. So there's a little bit of that happening. We're just doing a lot of small business stops, things that we can do, with a small scale kind of a presence, just to hear how people are doing. So it's, you kind of miss that real-time feedback you get from people in a campaign like this, and, the interactions and retail stops that you can make. So, it's too bad that we can't do all that. But, I think, regardless of your political perspective, I think most people are voting this year. So it's not going to take a lot of pushing to get people out to vote, I think.
How is the organization of your office and your work, the Washington work, different now?
Yeah, well, there are many more demands on our time. So we're getting lots of constituent calls from folks that are going through tough times, question about their Social Security or IRS issues, people with small business issues that are reaching out to us. So our staff's been working a lot harder than ever before. And, we have 2 district offices in New Hampshire, and they've mostly been remote up until the last month or two. And now we're getting some walk-ins, and we've got the plexiglass up so we can still, talk to people, meet with people in the office. So that's going pretty well. And in Washington, everyone's remote. So it's really just when you're on the Hill, it's just the members of Congress who are there. So it's a little bit different of a dynamic. And you sort of lose that personal interaction that you get when the team's all present and together. You can, collaborate in a way that is a little bit harder with technology.
I know I see that a lot with my job. We're used to being able to go into someone else's cube and, to discuss things informally. And we don't have that anymore.
Okay, so YouTube's looking good.
Good morning, Betty.
Y'all should take advantage
Hi, Betty.
of chatting now with your microphones on if you want, because we'll shortly, in a couple minutes,
You can't
mute
turn them on.
You can't turn them on. Okay, let's see.
You're on now.
Hi, Betty. Hi, Betty.
Good morning, everyone. Almost at election day, huh?
Yeah.
Indeed. Hey, Betty.
Hey,
Good to have you here.
Hey, Betty. Good morning. Hey, Kevin.
good morning, Rabbi.
Hey, Shelley. Hey, Kevin.
Hi. I just want to say to Chris Pappas that I was listening to those meetings, that audio meetings during the beginning of coronavirus that you were part of, and I found them very helpful. It was very interesting that I was getting phone calls to join the meeting at my home, but they were very good.
Oh, good. Yeah, we were trying to, do what we could to provide some information and get some, experts, to be able to answer questions. And actually, it's funny, we did about a dozen of those. In total, we had 100,000 people that were participating in those calls. So
Wow.
Custer and I joined together on those. I think they were pretty effective.
Good morning, Chris.
Hi, Betty. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Great. You're all right.
Good. Getting tired?
No, not at all.
Good.
Not at all.
Energized.
That's right.
I'm glad. I'm glad.
Don, I'm gonna hand this to you.
Okay, so we're ready to get started. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. I'm Don Gorelick, President of the Southern New Hampshire Jewish Men's Club.
It's not me. Oh, it is me.
Is that better? Sorry. As I was saying, I'm Don Gorelick, President of the Southern New Hampshire Jewish Men's Club. Welcome to our 2020 Political Breakfast. Thank you for joining us under these unusual circumstances. Until this year, our political breakfast has been an in-person event at Temple Beth Abraham and included a wonderful breakfast with bagels, lox, eggs, coffee, and dessert. Before we begin, I would like to thank our board member, Paul Moverman, for arranging this morning's speakers and serving as our point man for this event. Paul, please wave at us. We also have several other board members and volunteers who have worked on this event. Their work is much appreciated. A special thank you to one of our congregants, Betty Lasky, for helping us contact several of the candidates. The Jewish Men's Club is in its 38th year in Nashua. We are always looking for new members, so please see our email for additional information on joining. We are planning some very special programs this year, and for the time being, these will be Zoom events. Please check out the temple calendar for more details. Most of you know our rabbi, John Spiros Savet. Rabbi John has served the Jewish community at Temple Beth Abraham since 2008. He is our past president of the Nashua Area Interfaith Council and an experienced moderator for several previous political breakfasts. He will be serving as our moderator today. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi John Spiros Savet and our candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And I'm just going to start by going over a few of the ground rules for this gathering. And thank you to Don and thank you to Paul for setting this up. If you hear noise in the background, there are children here with the launch of our Sunday education program, so I'll mute myself when I'm not talking. In order to allow the candidates the greatest opportunity to speak and respond, here are some guidelines set by the Men's Club and its programming committee. All participants, other than the candidate and just myself when I'm asking questions, will be muted, and until the very end of after all the candidates and people will be unmuted and are able to schmooze. You can submit any questions that you want to me through the chat, which will go just privately from you to me, and I'll go through the questions and convey them on our behalf to each candidate. Everything else, all the other chat features are turned off, so we can't chat on the side or chat separately with each other. Also, all of the nonverbal feedback, reaction, etc. functions as well. We know that many people are very excited about the election, but we are not going to permit on-camera campaigning or visible reactions, and the co-hosts in the meeting will be there to kind of police and turn off the cameras and feeds of anyone who engages in distracting kinds of behaviors like that. I also want to mention that at different points in the morning there will be members of the press in the meeting. So if your image is available, if your camera is on, this means that you might be. This means this is a public place where your image might appear in print and video in reporting on this event. And if you don't want that to happen, you can disable the video function on your device, which depending on what device you're using, is at the usually on the bottom of your screen. And if you don't want to be part of this, even with your name, we have a live stream on the Beth Abraham YouTube channel going on right now. And if you have any technical issues during the meeting, we have a tech support line, 978-300-2572. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first guest, current U.S. Representative for the 1st District, Chris Pappas. And Congressman Pappas, you can speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for back and forth on questions.
Okay, well, great. I appreciate the opportunity, and good morning, Rabbi. And I want to thank everyone for welcoming me here today. I hope certainly everyone is staying safe out there. Certainly I want to thank the Southern New Hampshire Jewish Men's Club for hosting the forum here today. I know usually we like to gather in person, but this is a good workaround in ensuring that we can continue to have a good dialogue, and I look forward to the questions that you all have. Look, we can't understate this. This is a serious crisis that we're all experiencing right now in our country. We've lost nearly 220,000 Americans, 466 Granite Staters due to COVID-19, and we've seen the impacts on our economy. This is not a time for politics as usual. I think it's an all hands on deck moment where we've got to do what we can to redouble our efforts, and we've got to focus on protecting the lives and the livelihoods of Granite Staters and people across our country. So our work in Congress is important right now, and I've been working to try to bridge the divide, to bring Democrats and Republicans together to focus on bipartisan relief packages that address coronavirus, include provisions for things like testing, critical research, aid to New Hampshire hospitals and community health centers, and support for workers and our small business community. I think the American people deserve a response to this pandemic that's truly led by the brightest minds in industry and academia, that's supported by our American companies and our workers, and that is truly guided by science. And we've got to make sure that we don't lose the sense of urgency that exists. And it's got to be grounded in compassion for our fellow Americans. So I think that we can clearly see the way that our country has fallen behind the rest of the world with respect to our COVID-19 response. And I believe that the administration has been guided not by science, but by ideology and politics too often. And I think that they have not been up to the task of steering our country through this crisis. I believe we can do better. And I think for the sake of our kids who are out of class right now in many districts, our seniors who are worried about their health and their safety, our small business owners who are just wondering whether they can keep their lights on, and for all of our communities that are being hit hard right now, we've got to do better. I've continued to work with political leaders at all levels in New Hampshire of both parties to focus on how we can get relief out. I think that we've got to see another round of support. I continue to call on leaders of both parties to split the difference and make something happen. We need to compromise because the support in particular to our state and local budgets is really critical to maintain public services, especially in the middle of this pandemic. We've got to treat this first and foremost as the health crisis that it is. That's why we need a more robust national testing strategy. We need to make sure that the supplies are there and the PPE. We need more support for our hospitals and healthcare system and our providers who are struggling right now. And I think we've got to do more to invest in research, to develop those innovative treatments and effective vaccines and ensure that they can be delivered across the country as quickly as possible once they're deemed safe and effective by FDA. We've got to focus on what we need to do to our economy too as well. Here in New Hampshire, we've seen high unemployment. Although jobs have come back, we know there are individuals who are underemployed, who are not working enough hours. We know that childcare and the state of education today is a significant barrier for some to return to the workforce, including a disproportionate number of women. We've got to focus on what we should do to support our Main Street economy. And that's why I've been advocating for additional tax credits, grants, and low-cost financing to help our struggling small businesses keep their doors open through this pandemic. I'm part of a family restaurant business in Manchester. There are certain sectors of our economy that are doing well right now, but if you look at in particular our hospitality businesses, our entertainment-related businesses, they continue to struggle. And we need to make sure that we're targeting additional relief to those parts of our economy that are struggling, that are losing revenue, to keep people in place and make sure they can continue to drive our economy in the long term. You know, I think in New Hampshire, we have a pretty special recipe here about neighbors helping neighbors, people coming together to help each other in a time of need. And I think we need to see that same commitment at all levels of government and really do all we can to face down this deadly pandemic with the kind of selflessness and generosity we see all across our state right now. We need a government that is driven by smart policies that are generous, competent, and compassionate for the people of this country. And we're going to continue to work on getting that additional relief over the finish line. It can't come soon enough. We have been passing bills over the last many months, including nearly 5 months ago, passing the HEROES Act, and just a couple weeks ago, passing a slimmed down version of the HEROES Act, and hope that we can find a path forward on this. And I think the Speaker, the Secretary of the Treasury, and Mitch McConnell need to continue to find ways to find common ground. Look, if we can agree on 3 or 4 provisions, let's pass those and let's move on. But I think doing nothing is just not appropriate, and it's not going to help this country weather this tough storm ahead. So we've got to continue to work together. And I think, what our experience has been over the last couple of years in Congress is that there is a bipartisan path forward. We've seen that with respect to trade. We've seen that with respect to major COVID relief legislation. We've passed more than 600 bipartisan bills through the House this session. And I've always looked for how can we partner with folks across the aisle when we have a good idea. That's why every bill that I introduce, I seek out a bipartisan co-sponsor. And of the 34 that I've written and introduced, more than half of those have been introduced with Republican colleagues. So I think you can make legislation better when you collaborate, when you are open to different points of view. And I've really seen that through my legislative and committee work. One of the bipartisan bills that I introduced during this crisis would create a grant program to strengthen research partnerships with the state of Israel. Israeli scientists have been doing really significant pioneering work on COVID-19. And I think a bilateral partnership would be a boost to our efforts to fully understand this virus and safe and effective vaccines and treatments. The bill that I introduced in the House was also introduced by Ted Cruz in the Senate. I'm not someone I agree with on a lot of things, but we can find some ways to work together. And this is one issue where there shouldn't be a difference between Republicans and Democrats. So we're optimistic that we can get this over the finish line and approved before the end of the year. And I think it speaks to the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship, which is strong. And I continue to support that in my work in Congress. I've visited Israel 3 times. I have 2 dear friends from college who made Aliyah. And I was most recently there last summer with a bipartisan group of freshman members of Congress. We were there on a tour. We got to meet all the major players, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, Benny Gantz from the Blue and White Party, as well as President Abbas from the Palestinian Authority. And I remember our group was talking to Mr. Gantz about, the state of our relationship and what the United States can do to promote security and peace in the region. And he told us something that stuck with me. He said, just be America. Stand for what your country has historically stood for and never turn your back on your allies. And I think we've got to take that to heart. Israel is our democratic ally. It's the Jewish homeland. And I believe we must always ensure that the support for the U.S.-Israel relationship does not fall victim to party politics here in the United States. It's got to be a bipartisan relationship that's supported across the board. In Congress, we've had the opportunity to support comprehensive security assistance for Israel. Last year, we passed a strong resolution condemning the BDS movement and supporting a 2-state solution. It garnered, I think, well over 300, nearly 400 votes in the House. There are very few things that get that type of broad consensus, but that resolution did. I've also supported new legislation that develops strategic economic and security partnerships with our allies in the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. And I think there's some exciting opportunities there. So it's certainly, there's certainly a lot on the table right now in Congress. There are many priorities that we can't ignore, even beyond the need for additional COVID legislation. And I just wanted to mention a few of the things that I've been working on in addition to that. I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee and the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. So I've been working hard on ensuring veterans who serve this country get the care that they have earned through the VA. I've been doing some significant work on infrastructure, making sure that we can rebuild our roads and bridges and develop rail service, improve our electric grid, and deploy high-speed broadband across states like New Hampshire, where there are significant holes. We have a tremendous opportunity over the long run to make those investments and create jobs. And I do hope in another term, that will be our opportunity to talk about how we can put this country back to work, and infrastructure is one of the ways we can do that. We've also got to lower the cost of prescription drugs and negotiate prices with the big drug companies. I support increasing access to affordable health care and protecting and building on the ACA. I've led efforts to protect members of the LGBTQ community from discrimination, to pass universal background checks for gun purchases, and ensure we can take steps to address climate change and protect our environment that's so important to who we are here in New Hampshire. So I really look forward to continuing these fights. And I think, the election is about what we can accomplish, certainly. I think this election is also fundamentally about who we are as a country. Some of the disturbing trends we see before our eyes include the rise of hate groups and anti-Semitism over the last several years. It is alarming, and that is not us. I think it has torn at the fabric of our nation. It's even taken a violent and deadly turn, and we've got to continue to say what America is truly about, and help create the inclusive future that we know and want to envision for us all. So we all have a responsibility to challenge and root out bigotry, racism, and violent extremism when we see it. And I think this pandemic hopefully has taught our country a thing or two about the fact that we are truly all in this together. We're all connected, and we can't move forward if we're leaving people out or leaving people behind. I know we have that sense here in New Hampshire, and I hope we can continue to reinforce it, both through these elections, but also through our civic and community life. It's just so important. So I believe, and I'm optimistic, that our best days still lie ahead, and I'm really looking forward to digging into some of these important topics in Congress and figuring out how we can move forward solutions. There's so much left to do. This is a state where I grew up. It's always going to be my home. I went through the public schools here, own a family restaurant business here. And the work that I do is really personal to me because it's about the people that I know and the people that I'm meeting each and every day, many of whom need an advocate and need some help right now. So I really want to stay in this fight. And despite the challenges that we have before us, and they are significant challenges, I'm really optimistic that we can make things better, and that politics and public service can be about finding that common good and really helping to lift all boats. So I look forward to the discussion here today. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to join you, and I'll turn it back over to you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Congressman. And I think we should keep the spotlight on Congressman Pappas, just for the stream and everything. So there are, as you said, so many different layers of concerns and needs related to COVID-19. Obviously, the need to protect lives and to flatten the curve to not overwhelm our healthcare system, and certainly at the same time, the dramatic impact this has had on people's ability to make a living, on students, not only in their education, but just in their well-being, and the tremendous amount of stress and anxiety that this has. How do you integrate all of those concerns into one picture and make policy that addresses not only the obvious life and death and economic needs, but all of the needs that people have right now?
It is all-encompassing because this crisis affects every aspect of our community life, of our economy, and we know that it can get worse if we don't treat it primarily as the public health crisis that it is. So that's job one, is beating the virus and staying ahead of the virus, because if we don't, we're not going to have the freedom in the long term to go about our daily lives. We're going to lose more people. People are going to be isolated. We're going to see disruptions to services and education and healthcare and all the things that we need to keep our communities strong and safe for the future. So I really think that our additional efforts to continue to ramp up testing and treatment, continue to invest in the vaccine and public health is going to be so crucial to making sure that we can ultimately overcome this. We also can't necessarily put all our eggs in the vaccine basket either and think that there's going to be some magic date, say in the spring, where we'll turn the corner and we'll just flip a switch and go back to life as we knew it before. That's not going to be the case. And so we have to set expectations appropriately, and we've got to make sure that we are working as swiftly as we can to deploy a vaccine if it's safe and effective, but that we're also taking all the measures that we need to take: social distancing, mask wearing. And I think our elected leaders need to model that good behavior and lift up those messages that can really help save lives and keep people safe. We also have to look at, who's falling through the cracks and who's being left behind, and the impacts to vulnerable members of our community right now. What we have seen is some alarming trends on a number of fronts. An increase in the amount of overdoses that we're seeing in New Hampshire, and substance misuse going up, sexual and domestic violence on the rise in New Hampshire. Oftentimes the safest place for someone to be isn't necessarily at home. And so all the more reason why we really need a comprehensive effort here to make sure that there are services available so that people can stay safe, that they can get the help that they need. We can do that through additional relief legislation, but it's also really about the community pulling together and people looking out for one another. So we do see that spirit alive and well in New Hampshire. I mean, I think that at every step of the way, we've seen people going the extra mile. We've seen, businesses that are really hurting, making donations of equipment and supplies that will keep our frontline workers safe. I think of the nurse in Manchester who, after her shift every day, would go down to a maker space and be making gowns and masks for her fellow coworkers at the hospital. So people want to pitch in. And I think it's about making sure we're mobilizing this effort, that we have leadership that is focusing on the goals that we can achieve, and making sure that, no one falls through the cracks or is left out as we move forward. So I really think that this is akin to, mobilizing a great effort, as we've seen in military conflicts in the past. There's something for everyone to do. We all have that personal responsibility we have to take, and we all have to exhibit the community concern that's necessary to make sure we're stronger on the other side. So that's a lot to say. That can be driven by policy, but policymakers can also must be leading the effort to encourage the community involvement that's needed to move forward.
There are a number of questions here relating to the Affordable Care Act, and in the next term, the Supreme Court is going to be deciding about the constitutionality of the act and many concerns about pre-existing conditions. And if the Supreme Court were to strike down the act in such a way that the pre-existing conditions feature disappeared, what do you think Congress would be able to do in order to make affordable coverage of needs available for people with pre-existing conditions?
Well, this is really concerning to me, and I'm concerned that the U.S. Senate, after stonewalling the House on so many bills that we've sent over to them on wanting to hit the pause button on COVID relief legislation, can move heaven and earth and clear the decks to allow this confirmation to take place while people are already voting. And I really think that people's voices should be heard before a decision of this consequence is made. But be that as it may, I think it's really important that we're electing folks that understand the healthcare needs of this state, that are supporting and wanting to move beyond the political attacks on the Affordable Care Act. But that's hard to do when the administration will be in court a week after the election, pushing their case to try to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And this really comes after many years of the administration trying to water down the ACA, not fully implement it. There have been several efforts in Congress, I think 60 maybe, to invalidate the Affordable Care Act, and there have been lawsuits in court. So, when I talk to patients around New Hampshire, when I talk to healthcare providers in our hospitals, we know that the Affordable Care Act has been transformational for our state. One, we've been able to expand Medicaid to over 60,000 individuals in our state. We have, the essential coverage that we all enjoy in our healthcare plans. In addition to that, people with pre-existing conditions, which is 571,000 people in New Hampshire, are protected by it. And that means insurance companies can't either charge you more or decide not to offer you coverage at all to begin with. Now, some say, well, we can come up with a way to take care of that, but people really haven't put ideas on the table to date, and they pressed ahead with the effort to just totally destroy the Affordable Care Act and upend it altogether. And I think that's irresponsible, especially in the middle of a pandemic, especially when there's been so much destabilization of our healthcare system already. We should be accepting that people have basic rights to healthcare in this country. That's protected in the Affordable Care Act. And I think it's something we can continue to build on. We should be focusing on bringing down costs, especially of prescription drugs and insurance coverage, We've been passing some legislation on those fronts, but we can't fully address that if we're still fighting over whether or not the basic coverage of the Affordable Care Act can stand.
Do you have any idea as to whether the train service from either Nashua or Manchester to Boston is something which could become a reality in the near future, and if there's any action you or your fellow representatives could take in Congress to further that, if you are in favor of that?
Absolutely. It's something I support. I think it could be a game changer for our economy. I know Nashua and Manchester have been taking steps to prepare for the day where we can achieve train service, both by identifying transit hubs as well as galvanizing support in the business community. So this is something that can create jobs. Right now, New Hampshire has they're working on how to do the engineering work for the project and also to put together the financial plan for it. That's probably going to take 1.5 to 2 years. At the end of that process, we'll have to make sure that the federal support is there to provide the financing for something like this. And as a member of the Transportation Committee, I've been working on provisions with Congresswoman Custer to make sure that the programs to start up new rail service are funded, and can help with a project like the Capital Corridor project. We've been pushing some changes to allow for a streamlined approval process and to allow for greater financing of this particular project. We anticipate that more than half the support can come from federal sources, and that the state can get creative with how it bonds the rest and how it pulls together community support to make it happen. So, we are actually live in one of the regions, it's one of the most populous regions of our country without passenger rail service. And so it's about time we restored it. I think we need to have an intermodal system of transportation, and adding this mode would be really tremendous for Southern New Hampshire. And I think it's something we absolutely can achieve. It's just going to take a few years to put together the financing, but I believe the political will is there, and the community support is definitely there.
There was a proposal made to the platform committee at the Democratic convention, and it's a proposal that's been supported vocally by some of the Democratic presidential candidates and certainly some in your party in Congress, to condition U.S. aid to Israel, or some amount of it, that on whether or not Israel takes any actions to change the status of any areas in the West Bank. And I'm wondering what you think about that, whether you support or oppose that proposal, and whether you make any distinction between areas of the West Bank that many people feel are likely to become part of Israel permanently, that have been settled substantially, that are near the Green Line or near Jerusalem, and other areas of the West Bank. How do you think about that issue of the West Bank as it applies to U.S. aid to Israel?
Sure. Well, I don't think we should be conditioning our aid to Israel. That's not something I support. And I don't believe that there would be strong support in Congress for that today, or even when the dust settles from the election. Israel is a friend and an ally. That doesn't mean we have to agree with Israeli policy all the time. But sometimes you can talk tough with your friends, and you can share your differences. But it doesn't mean that you're going to pull the rug out from under a friend, especially when it comes to security assistance. So I don't think we should be conditioning it in that way. But look, I think that ultimately the only viable strategy is to continue to support a two-state solution. And the United States has a role to play in encouraging that kind of dialogue and those conversations to happen. Ultimately, we can't dictate the terms of a solution, but we have to be doing all we can to make sure that we're creating the conditions for that kind of dialogue to happen. On my last trip to Israel, we, as I said, met with the leaders over there, including President Abbas in Ramallah. And, he's in the 15th year of a 4-year term. I'm not sure how that exactly happens. But, we really need, leadership that, is willing to come to the table and actually have these conversations. We were asking and pressing him with the question of, would you come to the table with no preconditions? And he really wouldn't answer us. So, I think that unfortunately we seem further off than maybe we have been at other points in our history. There have been some close calls with respect to a lasting peace, and the United States has to continue to push that. And I do think that, ultimately, land swaps will have to be part of whatever ultimate negotiated settlement comes out. But I do support the two-state solution, and I think the U.S. shouldn't be the one dictating what that looks like. But I think there's a lot we can do to bring people together, to create those conversations and try to push in the right direction.
I think this may be the last question as we get to we want to go a few minutes over because we started a little bit late with you. Social Security isn't a topic that's been directly addressed kind of at the top level in the presidential or many of the campaigns, but as you're thinking about the long-term viability of Social Security, what approaches do you advocate for ensuring that?
Well, this is a foundational program. It's an earned benefit, and it's more important than ever because, we're much less likely to be working 30 or 40 years at the same job these days and, have a pension at the end that we can use for our retirement. So we've got to make sure Social Security is there, is working for today's retirees as well as tomorrow's. That's why I think that the effort that the president was pushing of late to suspend the payroll taxes, which the actuary said could bankrupt Social Security in a couple years, would be really dangerous for the program. We've got to make sure that it is solvent. I don't support ideas like means testing it or raising the retirement age. And one of the things that we can look at is the disparity that exists in terms of who's paying in to the system. There are those who are at the very high end of the income spectrum who only pay on a fraction of their income, where working people pay on 100% of their income. And so we can look at that, and that's been adjusted over time as a way to make sure the system is solvent for the future. But it's absolutely foundational. It has, kept poverty among the elderly low, and it's just one of these foundational programs that we have to make sure doesn't get cut or privatized or ultimately changed, because it's part of the basic bargain of, what it means to be an American.
Well, thank you so much. And on behalf of all of us, Representative Pappas, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for your service and your willingness to come back and ask for another chance to continue to serve the people in your district and our state. And thank you for spending time with us.
Well, thank you. And thanks, everyone. Stay safe. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you. Have a great day.
You too. We are moving on in our forum, and we're welcoming Corky Messner, who is running with the support of the Republican Party for the U.S. Senate for the state of New Hampshire. I want to see if we can spotlight Mr. Messner and see if you're on screen and say a welcome to you. Here you go. And we are, just to go over again, for first of all to say our welcome to you. Thank you for being here. My name is John Spiro-Savet. I'm the rabbi at Temple Beth Abraham, but really today not so much functioning in my religious role, but just here to be a coordinator and moderator for your half an hour with us, and a chance for me to convey some questions that people within this group have for you. We want to give you a chance in a moment to talk for up to 15 minutes if you like, just to present you and introduce yourselves and what's important to you. I want to say that this is traditionally a forum of folks who are very well informed and are about issues and about the people who are running. So if you have your philosophy, we're eager to hear more in the standpoint of why you have it and how you got it, and we're really interested in very specific answers to the questions that we have. Again, for those who are here, please submit questions that you have just through the chat, and I will be able to combine them, collate them, and present them. But Mr. Messner, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it, and thanks to everybody for participating. And let me make sure I have this set up right here. Okay, there we go. And I really appreciate the opportunity. Let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I'm Corky Messner. I grew up in a blue-collar family in Altoona, Pennsylvania. My dad was an auto mechanic. I left home when I was 17, and I went into the Army to attend West Point. I graduated from West Point in 1979, became an airborne ranger infantryman. served for 5 years after I graduated. 4.5 of those years I was stationed in West Germany, where I ultimately had the privilege and honor of leading 150 infantry soldiers, and we guarded what was known then as the Iron Curtain, if you remember Winston Churchill's famous speech. And during that time, the way the treaties were set up is, we could on occasion go into communist East Germany and East Berlin. So I had the opportunity to observe what was going on in a socialist communist country. And this was in the early 80s. There were parts of East Berlin that had looked like World War II had ended just a few weeks earlier, that there was not much done to redevelop that area. So after I served, I went to law school, became a lawyer. Out of law school, I went to work at a large law firm and worked there for 5 or 6 years, and decided I wanted to become an entrepreneur. And I started my own law firm. So I was a small business man, and it was scary. It was really, really scary. I had many, many sleepless nights and worrying about creating enough revenue to pay bills and all those things. And through a lot of hard work and some luck, I was able to grow that small business into a national law firm that we now have 10 offices coast to coast. I have 3 kids. I have a daughter who's trying to work her way into medical school, and I have 2 sons who are West Pointers. My son Max just graduated in May from June from West Point, and he's now down at Fort Benning, Georgia, going through the infantry officer's basic course, and then he'll go through Ranger School, and then he's going to be deployed to Germany after he's done with all his training. And my son Thomas, who is a junior at West Point. So why am I running for the United States Senate? Well, I feel incredibly blessed to be an American, to have had the opportunities to go from a blue collar kid, we didn't have much of anything, to enjoy success in the military and success in the private sector. And I believe that opportunity is a function of the liberty and the freedom that we have in this country. And I think those liberties and those freedoms are what made this country, a great country. And so I decided to run and serve to fight for and preserve those liberties and freedom. I am concerned that we see a pull in the Democrat Party to more and more government power and control, and the more power that government has, I think we end up losing liberty. We end up losing freedom. So that's why I'm doing this. When I was a young cadet, I was, I don't know, I think I was 18 or 19 years old. And a buddy of mine asked me to come to New Hampshire with him to help shut down his aunt's camp at the base of Mount Monadnock. This was over 40 years ago. And I was a young, dumb, blue-collar kid. I didn't know much of anything, right? And I said to myself, gee, I want to come back to New Hampshire someday. And so 14 years ago, I came back here. I bought a home. And, I started out spending time in the summers here. And then about 10 years ago, I started spending more and more time here. and started running my business and from here remotely. And it's kind of interesting. You hear Governor Sununu talk about these executives who are calling and buying homes in New Hampshire and saying they're going to run their companies remotely now with the COVID situation. And as I said to Governor Sununu, well, I figured that out 10 years ago. And so I'm connected to New Hampshire. I love it here. I've helped conserve over 250 acres here. I'm involved in my community, and I'll be here the rest of my life. What do I believe in politically? I believe in limited government, low taxes, fiscal responsibility, a strong defense, and accountability. And I'm a political outsider. I've signed a term limit pledge. I would do no more than 2 terms. I know how to get stuff done in my legal career. I'm a corporate lawyer. I'm a transactional lawyer. I know how to bring people together and to come up with compromises to actually get things done. I think that's a skill set that many of our career politicians don't have. I know how to create jobs. I know how small businesses operate. I know how to help small businesses. And I can certainly be a critical force in bringing this economy back from the COVID crisis. So, I love America. I think America is good. I think we can get better. I think we can always get better. So, I'm running to serve. I'm running to fight for everybody in New Hampshire. And I can do that without any commitments to political parties or people. I'm self-made, so this isn't a career for me. And during this process, I was talking with Senator Rand Paul about endorsing me, and the last question he asked me, he said, "Corky, will you stand up to Republicans in the U.S. Senate?" And I said, "Of course I will." And I explained to him why I will and who I am, which gives me the strength to do that kind of thing. And at the end of my question, he endorsed me on the spot. So I will be an independent voice for Granite Staters, and Granite Staters will be my #1 priority. So with that, I'm glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. So talking about COVID-19 and the Senate, every state, and New Hampshire certainly has its own experience of the pandemic. Even our relatively better than other states experience, we're still meeting you like this and not the way we wish we could be. As a senator, what would you think would be the role of the federal government and federal policy in helping us over the coming months and year with the pandemic?
Sure. Good question. I think on a number of levels, I first and foremost, we now know that, people and small businesses need help now. The original CARES Act PPP loan money is almost run out. Small businesses need more help. We know that individuals are hurting, and so I think we need to get help to them. I think it was a mistake a month ago in the U.S. Senate when Republicans proposed a $500 billion package with enhanced unemployment at the $300 level, and with more PPP loan money, and with some other funds in there that Jeanne Shaheen and the Democrats said no. And that kind of bridge help, I think, should have passed. And that doesn't mean there couldn't have been discussions and negotiations about additional help. That doesn't mean there couldn't have been a proposal to add more money for hospitals it just was a flat no. And in my view, it was a pure political move by the Democrats. I think in addition, the flip side of that is the amount of money that has been spent in the COVID situation, over $3 trillion so far. I think there was far too much wasteful spending in there. So I think on a going forward basis, it needs to be targeted to those areas that actually those people, those businesses, those communities, those hospitals that need help, to help them through the problems created by COVID. I think in addition, the whole of America approach that President Trump has taken with respect to this Operation Warp Speed, and even the New York Times wrote an article recently favorably about Operation Warp Speed and the guidance that the federal government is given that needs to continue. I think Governor Sununu has done a good job in New Hampshire managing through this. We all want things to be open and back to normal, but we're now seeing things surge around the world. In Europe, the surge there is pretty dramatic. This is a serious thing, and we need to take it seriously, and work together and help each other out through this.
One very across the board impact of COVID-19 has been through schools, and the fact that across the state and across the country, children by and large are not in a regular way in schools. This has an effect on everything from their own learning, their well-being, social development, and of course parents, especially parents who can't continue to work and earn their living by somehow balancing things at home. What do you think it would take to mobilize an effort that would attack this problem and solve it in a way that would be good for both the lives and the health and the economic well-being of everybody involved through schools?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think you mentioned the word balance, and I think balance is really important. And as it relates to our children, the importance of the socialization they get in school in addition to the learning. And as you said, parents being able to go to work and earn a living, and we ought to find ways in each school, in each school district, to try to get our children back in school safely. And we know here in New Hampshire, it's different what's going on in the North Country versus what's going on in the southern part of the state. And we ought to be able to do things where teachers and administrators have adequate protections, but the balance needs to occur. I mean, it is, we are starting to see now, some of the consequences of people staying at home too much, and in the number of cancer screenings that are down, and what's the impact of that, and other healthcare matters, from a simple checkup and discovering, and if someone's sick, and so we got to have balance here, and we're going to have to navigate this in a safe, balanced way to figure out how to go on and get kids back in school in a safe way.
So a lot of questions that relate to the Affordable Care Act. We certainly have known and heard a lot this last couple of weeks through the Supreme Court nomination that the Affordable Care Act is before the Supreme Court, and a lot of discussion about pre-existing conditions. If the act is struck down, or just if you're able to be representing us in the Senate, what do you consider to be a free market approach to protecting all people with pre-existing conditions?
Yeah, and there's been a lot of misinformation out there that my opponent has been spewing about this. So thank you for the question. You know, I think there's a fundamental question about healthcare, and that is, you know, who do you want to be in charge of your healthcare? Do you want the government to be in charge of it, or do you want yourself, your family, your doctors to be in charge of it? First of all, on the Affordable Care Act, there's oral arguments in front of the Supreme Court on November 10th. And typically what the Supreme Court does after they hear oral arguments, they go through a process, which is why there won't be a decision on the Affordable Care Act until next May or June. So you know, this fear mongering that there's a hearing on November 10th and oh my gosh, the Affordable Care Act may go away on November 11th is just not reality. Secondly, what I would say is, I think it's highly unlikely that the Supreme Court would decide next May or June that the entirety of the Affordable Care Act would go away. So what I would propose is legislation. I mean, and I would do it as soon as I go to the US Senate in early January. I would propose legislation that, one, protects everybody with pre-existing conditions, separate and distinct from the Affordable Care Act, that no one would be denied health insurance because of a pre-existing condition. So, and I think you get that law on the books, so that way, no matter what happens to the Affordable Care Act, people with pre-existing conditions are in fact protected. You know, secondly, I would propose legislation that provides that people can stay on their parents' health insurance policies up until they're 26 or even older. And again, separate and distinct legislation. You know, so those areas that, you know, the manipulation of people during this political season with fear about healthcare and health insurance, you know, we can put all that to rest with separate legislation, and it doesn't have to be all of this fear mongering around the Affordable Care Act. Thirdly, I think Medicaid expansion is a good thing. I think people, you know, helping people buy health insurance is a good thing. Now, I think what we ought to do is we ought to pass laws that allow insurance companies to sell health insurance across state lines. I mean, there was a time in New Hampshire, there were 26 health insurance companies selling health insurance in New Hampshire. It was a vibrant, competitive market. And that kind of competition helps bring the cost down of health insurance. Because of what Gene Shaheen did as governor long ago, and what's happened with the ACA, there's 3 health insurance companies selling health insurance in New Hampshire. So we need more competition in the market that will help bring the cost down. I think transparency in healthcare is important, so we as consumers can make informed decisions. I was talking to the executives from the hospitals in the North Country, and I asked them, you know, what one thing would really help bring costs down? They said transparency. Let patients know what's going on, and when a doctor orders a test, well, it's the same test that my primary care physician ordered. Why double up on it? Bring the cost of prescription drugs down. And I think President Trump, with his executive order, is making progress in that area. Lastly, that people don't talk about much is there needs to be tort reform. There are far too many frivolous lawsuits that drive up the cost of health care. Not only the cost of defending the lawsuit, but you know, my law firm, we defend doctors and hospitals. And what happens because of the frivolous lawsuits, the healthcare system is practicing medicine in a way to defend frivolous lawsuits, and it ends up adding to the cost.
Thank you. Just to follow up, one piece of that related to the first couple of things you suggested as policies, pre-existing conditions, 26 years old. Would you have existing insurance companies and plans be mandated to be the implementers of that, or some other mechanism to ensure coverage?
Well, I would have the insurance companies mandated. Now, what, with a lot of the fear mongering that's going on right now, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Right now, today, if you have health insurance from an employer, if you have employer-based health insurance, and about 65% of people in New Hampshire have employer-based health insurance, and you change jobs to a new employer, that new employer cannot deny, or that new health insurance could not deny health insurance based on a pre-existing condition. That law has been on the books since the 90s. It's part of HIPAA. It was passed, it was called, people couldn't change jobs. They were locked in their job because they were afraid to lose their health insurance. Well, that law has been on the books since the 90s. So yeah, I would mandate that health insurance companies could not deny people health insurance because of a pre-existing condition. And, and that would be consistent with the law that's on the books with HIPAA right now.
So a lot of us are very tied to Israel, both because of personal ties and because of our belief in the U.S.-Israel alliance and its benefits for the United States. And the Trump administration has put out a couple of very substantial proposals related to an economic future for Israel and the Palestinian territories, and of course a political vision of peace that has manifest lately in a couple of agreements between Israel and Gulf nations. How do you overall look at the current approach to peacemaking in the Middle East, and how do you view the U.S.-Israel alliance?
Yeah, well, Israel is our closest ally in the world, maybe with the exception of Canada, but the top two, and we need to stay shoulder to shoulder with Israel in all circumstances and help them in all scenarios. I think President Trump's approach, his change of direction in the Middle East has been really, really good. I think, Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism throughout the world and has been in the Middle East for a very, very long time. I think the idea of peace in the Middle East going through Iran and the Palestinians hasn't worked for decades, and I think that President Trump pulling out of the JCPOA and taking a different approach has been successful with these additional peace agreements with the UAE and Bahrain, but the number one priority is standing strong with Israel in the Middle East, and I think there's a solution there that with the Palestinians that is doable, but we must remember that any solution, any peace agreement with the Palestinians, must include an acknowledgement of Israel's right to exist.
What's your assessment around in New Hampshire particularly, but also around the country, on the state of anti-Semitism and of white supremacist and white nationalist organizing and activities, and what do you think, if any, new actions beyond what the authorities are doing now are warranted?
Yeah, I think we need to be very, very, very aggressive. Tracking down and eliminating white supremacy, anti-Semitism, any kind of bigotry, both on the right and the left. And you know, I happen to believe that America is good. America isn't perfect, but it's good, and we must constantly improve. And those kind of factions we need to aggressively track down and any kind of bigotry, both on the right. All right, I don't know what's going on.
Someone's got their microphone on. I'm just asking to turn it off.
Yeah. And I know that the Justice Department is getting aggressive against white nationalists and white supremacists, and we must be absolutely vigilant at all times. I mean, that kind of hatred could not exist. But here's the thing. I mean, the Democrats, the left, I think they've taken an approach now that America is bad, and we've got to throw out, all our values and start over. And I just don't agree with that. I think America is good. I think we need to be very aggressive to wipe out hate, no matter where we find it, and hold people accountable for that.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. The time just seems to go so fast, and
Sure.
we appreciate, especially those of us who haven't gotten a chance to talk with you before, to meet you. And Mr. Messner, we really appreciate your taking time not only for this forum, but also for taking this kind of public service seriously enough to devote your time and yourself to seeking this office from us. And good luck, and thank you.
Hey, John, one thing. My phone number is 603-515-6542. That's my cell. Call me, text me if you want to chat. I'm available.
Thank you so much.
All righty. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too. You too.
Bye-bye.
We are moving on, and we are welcoming our U.S. Representative Ann McLean Custer, who represents us in the 2nd District of New Hampshire. It is good to have you here. You know who I am. I'm, again, for anybody who's joined us in the last little bit, I'm John Spiro-Savet, serving as the moderator and facilitator here for this forum, and Rabbi at Temple Beth Abraham. Again, please, if you're participating and want to have some questions asked, funnel them to me through the chat. Now that you'll get a chance to formulate it any way you want, and it's coming just to me. And Representative Custer, thank you for taking the time for us. We've got about a half an hour, and you can take up to the first half of that if you like to say whatever it is that you'd like to say. I think you know from being here at this forum before that we are a group who are very engaged, well-informed, probably know a good deal about you, and anything specific, particularly that you can add to the picture in your opening and also in response to questions, is really what we want to hear. So welcome, and the floor is yours. We can't hear you, however. So I think you might be muted. Let's see, we're working on that. Oh, interesting. It says you're not muted, and yet I don't hear. Can any of our tech people, you want to unmute yourself and tell me if you're working on that?
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing you are, Rabbi. She's not muted as far as Zoom is. It might be your PC, Ann.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Good morning, Rabbi Spiro-Savet, and thank you for moderating this conversation. And thank you to the Southern New Hampshire Jewish Men's Club for having me here today. I wish we could all be together. I want to say hello to all my friends at Temple Beth Abraham and everyone who's watching this forum. I hope that all of you and your families are well as we face these challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. These are very difficult times for many people in New Hampshire and all across this country. And I appreciate the opportunity for us to be together in this moment today. This is truly the most important election in my lifetime, and I can assume in many of yours as well. The issues that we're discussing and debating are critical to the lives of hardworking families all across the Granite State. Issues like improving access to quality, affordable healthcare, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, standing up for our veterans and service members and their families, and expanding economic opportunity for everyone across the Granite State. Protecting our environment, defending women's autonomy and reproductive rights are all at stake. And of course, how we respond as a nation to COVID is at the forefront of the minds of people all across New Hampshire and this country. And that's why this election is so important, because we need to look forward to how we can forge compromise and work together to tackle the challenges we face as a state and as a nation. I've spent my time in Congress focused on how we can bring people together to deliver real results for the people right here in New Hampshire. And I truly believe that that is the approach we must take with everyone, whether it be here at home fighting a pandemic or in our diplomacy around the globe. This morning, I wanted to discuss a topic that's close to all of our hearts, the steadfast support of the United States for Israel and our support of the Israeli people. I have had the tremendous great honor of traveling to Israel as a member of Congress on 2 occasions, and I had the opportunity to travel 40 years ago as a staff member on a 3rd trip to Israel. The relationships and friendships made on those trips will be with me forever. These trips also underscored for me the importance of the same spirit of working together that I believe is necessary to building long-term, enduring peace between Israelis and Palestinians and all across the region. I'm committed to supporting Israel and promoting peace through better understanding. And the best way to achieve this goal, I believe, remains a 2-state solution that would create a unique Palestinian state alongside Israel. In addition to traveling to Israel, I've had a chance to see this type of relationship building happening close to home. Kids for Peace fosters interfaith understanding by bringing together 12-year-old Jewish, Muslim, Christian boys and girls. And I was so thankful to visit Kids for Peace in Greenfield, New Hampshire, and see the compassion and understanding among the campers after they had had a chance to get to know each other well. Their friendship gave me hope that we can all focus on what brings us together rather than what divides us. I'm proud that in the United States Congress, there have been continued bipartisan support for the self-defense of Israel and the protection of the Israeli people. And I know this support will continue across administrations, regardless of party lines. Today, there's a common challenge that we all face in our communities around the globe, and that's the COVID-19 pandemic. I know it's been a challenge from both a public health and economic perspective. And while we certainly have not been spared here in New Hampshire, by working together, our Democratic federal delegation with our governor, we've done a good job containing the virus so far. Since March, I've led calls with state and local leaders, as well as businesses, education, healthcare, industry from across New Hampshire, including the business community, Fidelity Investments, BAE, Anthem, and others, the New Hampshire College and University Council presidents, the New Hampshire Hospital Association leadership, chambers of Commerce, town and city managers, mayors, county administrators, and rural community and city leaders alike. I was pleased that early on in the pandemic, we were able to work together in Congress in a bipartisan way to advance the CARES Act. This legislation has been so critical to supporting our healthcare system and struggling small businesses and individuals during this crisis. Through the CARES Act, we brought more than $4.2 billion in funding to New Hampshire. We helped get personal protective equipment to our healthcare workers and first responders, and we provided needed support to our hospitals and to struggling families. That legislation also created a program that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the Paycheck Protection Program. The PPP helped 24,000 businesses across the state of New Hampshire. And of those 22,000 received loans of that less than $150,000. I firmly believe that those 22,000 loans under $150,000 should be forgiven, and I support legislation to do just that. Business owners should be focused on getting through the pandemic, not burdensome paperwork. All told, that's more than $2.6 billion in PPP loans for small businesses in our state. Under funding from CARES, the governor also created the Main Street Relief Fund, which allocated $400 million in federal money to small businesses in the form of grants. And that resulted in 6,500 Granite State businesses receiving a total of $340 million in support. It's clear that for our economy to fully recover, we need to tackle the health crisis caused by COVID-19. Earlier this year, I released my roadmap to recovery that's available on our website, custer.house.gov, outlining specific policies and ideas to help address our continued efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19 and bolster our economic recovery. My roadmap outlined the importance of a national testing strategy. We need a national response that can rapidly test every symptomatic case or those suspected of being exposed to COVID-19. Followed by contact tracing. We need to ramp up our efforts at community contact tracing to protect people who may have come in contact with somebody with COVID-19. Maintaining physical distancing and mask wearing and supported isolation, which goes hand in hand with testing and contact tracing to support individuals who self-isolate to protect the public health. And finally, as the member of the Health Subcommittee of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, I've been working hard to support the development of a safe and effective vaccine that can be equitably distributed to all Americans. We need the American people to have confidence in the scientific process and in the vaccine. And we must be willing to take it, because until we build confidence in consumers that can go safely about their lives, and small businesses and communities will continue to face hardship. I believe that we should not politicize the vaccine process. And I'm working on the transparency of the scientific process and FDA approval so that we can boost confidence in the American people that the vaccine will be safe and effective to ending COVID-19. My roadmap also outlined important economic support. I believe we must do more and improve the Paycheck Protection Program to serve small businesses and struggling nonprofits, providing hard-hit businesses with second loans as needed, and delivering targeted assistance for the struggling restaurant industry and live concert and theater venue operators. In New Hampshire, we still face 6.4% unemployment. Luckily, that's a big drop from the high rate at 16% unemployment last spring. But I believe we need to extend unemployment benefits to those who still are unable to work, so that no family should choose between putting food on the table or paying their rent. I want to support frontline heroes that have been incredible stepping up during the pandemic. And I've introduced legislation to provide $25,000 in student loan debt forgiveness or education credits for essential workers and their families. This program will honor our heroes and help them to buy homes, start families, and present opportunities to move forward after their incredible service to our country. As we look forward, we should be thinking big about how we can grow our economy and build back better in a way that lifts all families in New Hampshire. There's tremendous opportunity with large, bold infrastructure that will increase our competitiveness and put thousands of Granite Staters back to work. I'm disappointed that leadership has not been able to reach an agreement on a new COVID response package. I believe that the White House and Speaker Pelosi have come to an agreement, but that the President of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, is blocking that agreement. I believe Republicans and Democrats should come to the table and focus on where we agree to get a deal for the American people. And while working across the aisle can be difficult in these polarizing times, I believe today it's more important than ever before. And that's why I've focused my career on bringing together Republicans and Democrats to get real results for people here in New Hampshire. Take, for instance, my work to support New Hampshire veterans. I was just one of 2 Democrats to co-sponsor the VA Mission Act, and I attended the signing ceremony with the president at the White House. This past year, I was proud to introduce and pass the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act to ensure care for Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange while serving in the Navy off the coast of Vietnam. I've also brought together Republicans and Democrats on 2 task forces that I founded, the Bipartisan Opioid Task Force and the Bipartisan Task Force to End Sexual Violence. Both have helped to drive legislation on these critical issues in Congress. I've helped to deliver $425 million to New Hampshire through the Cures Act for funding to address the opioid epidemic. And I led the charge in Congress to extend DEA authority to combat fentanyl and dangerous synthetic opioids. We face many challenges as a state and a nation at this moment, but I'm confident that by working together, we can come out building back better and stronger than ever before. Thank you, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you. So to start with COVID-19, I think that we look at the planning that took place in most areas in New Hampshire between the end of this last school year and the beginning of this school year, and did not succeed in being able fully to send kids back to school, and even in many places not even to be there at all yet. And you talked about the meetings that you have had related to this and the people who are involved in everything related to the pandemic and your roadmap. When you look at your roadmap and you map it against the challenge of returning to schools and all the side impacts that are so profound that come with being and not being in school, do you think that your roadmap gets us there, and when? Or are there more things that are needed to do in order to restore normal life to our kids and their families?
Sure. Well, I can safely say that if our elected leaders in Washington had followed our roadmap from the beginning, we would be in a much, much better place. We have to turn to the president and his mockery and his calling COVID-19 a hoax, refusing to this day to wear masks or to endorse masks. The public health science is very, very clear on this. And if everyone had been wearing masks, if we had had a national testing strategy that was never implemented by this administration, we would have been in a much better place. Now, I will say here in New Hampshire, we were able to work together across party lines behind the scenes. And I think many of the right steps were taken. But what we're seeing this fall is outbreaks of COVID because people are not following these simple public health reminders. And I think, honestly, I just have to be candid here. I think the president has done a disservice to the country by politicizing our public health response. And I think what you're seeing across New Hampshire, people are gathering in groups without the protection of the masks, without physical distancing. We know from Dr. Fauci and other epidemiologists that gathering indoors in large groups is not recommended. And that's sadly, what's driving the increase in cases over the past month here in New Hampshire. And it's the primary reason why children can't be back in school. There are other countries that have done much better. And there are other places around the world where children have been in school and have been staying in school. By the way, I've talked to many, many teachers about this. The kids are doing an excellent job wearing the mask. The kids are not the problem. It's the exposure that people are bringing into the school from the community transmission that started back up in the southern tier here in New Hampshire.
When you think about the Affordable Care Act and the possibility that some or all provisions of it may be struck down by the Supreme Court coming up, what would be the fallback plan, if you think there is any, for what you would consider to be the most important protections that are available right now?
Sure. And let me say at the outset, this is a strong disagreement with my opponent and certainly with this administration. I think it would be a disaster for this country and for tens of thousands of people right here in New Hampshire if the president was successful in repealing the Affordable Care Act. We've heard for 4 years that they have a plan right around the corner. There is no plan. And the people most exposed would be those that would lose their coverage completely here in New Hampshire for Medicaid expansion and those with pre-existing conditions. 570,000 people under the age of 65 have pre-existing conditions here in New Hampshire and would lose coverage if the Affordable Care Act was completely repealed. You asked for what I'm doing about that. I had the great honor of carrying the legislation in the House to protect people with pre-existing conditions and to ensure that they would be covered. But I will tell you the honest truth, the vast majority of Republicans voted against that bill in the House. And so I think this is a big distinction with my opponent. I feel very strongly that we can improve upon the Affordable Care Act, but we should not repeal it.
One of the other big things that's been going on, obviously, in the country are the racial justice protests as they relate to criminal justice and other things. And New Hampshire is a very white state, and in terms of the discussion of how people like myself or yourself, you talk a lot about your own history and your long history in this place. We're people of privilege. What do you think are the most constructive and frankly the less constructive ways for people who are not people of color to be allies, to think about this, to reflect on ourselves? You know, Vice President Biden made an announcement that this was so important that he was going to select a woman of color to be his running mate even before he decided who that was. Is that the kind of general approach that you would take to thinking about policies or public statements? Are there other ways of kind of bridge building and reflecting from a position of being a white person in New Hampshire?
Right. Well, thank you for that. And I agree with you that there are certain challenges to how to be a stronger ally to people of color. First, I should say that New Hampshire is becoming less white. And I think the recent census figures show that people of color make up close to 10% of the people here in New Hampshire. Certainly in Nashua, where you are, I've reached out to African Americans, the Black community, Hispanics, Indian Americans, and a vast number of refugees that have moved to New Hampshire and Nashua, Manchester, Concord, and throughout the state. And I think that's important to recognize because it's a misnomer to say that there is no discrimination here because we're such a white state. We need to be aware of people's life experiences and educate ourselves and learn more about what the barriers have been. So last spring, I was delighted to be a part of a Facebook Live event that we did with civil rights leaders in Nashua and with the Nashua Police Chief, Chief Carignan, who had started a committee 5 years ago to come together and learn, have conversations, create better understanding so that we can tackle implicit bias. And during that conversation, several things stood out to me. One was it was early in COVID. And one of the leaders, Gloria Timmons, said to me, she knew, I think it was 6 or 8 people who had died of COVID already. That's for me to recognize my privilege. I don't know anyone who has died of COVID, and these were people in her family. And so it helped me to understand and learn and educate myself about the disproportionate impact of COVID on communities of color. And now I'm applying that in the work that I'm doing on the vaccine to make sure that we have equal distribution of the vaccine, particularly specifically in communities of color. That's one example. Another way we can educate ourselves is just listening to people's life experience. Also joining us on the call was Senator Melanie LeVake, who has been a good friend of mine, and I'm so proud of her in the New Hampshire State Senate. And we were talking about the story that Cory Booker told repeatedly in New Hampshire, that his family had not been able to buy a home because of redlining and actions by realtors that refused to sell to people of color. And in his case, a lawyer, a white Jewish lawyer, had bought the home and helped them to navigate that process. Melanie spoke up and said that happened to her in Nashua, to her family in the 1960s, that her father was coming to Digital to work, and that his colleagues at Digital had to buy their home and sell it back to him because he was not able to buy a home in Nashua. So we can learn about that. We can talk about that so that people understand what these barriers historically have been and recognize what our privilege is. My father fought in World War II, and he was shot down in the Battle of the Bulge. He was a POW when his plane was shot down. And yet when he came home, he got the assistance of the GI Bill. He got the assistance to buy his first home. That has helped our equity and our financial situation in my family for generations. But families, Black GIs who came back from the war, didn't have that opportunity. They weren't helped by those programs. So I think it's a great question. I appreciate you bringing it up. We all need to work on it. And I certainly can say that my experience in Congress, having such a diverse Congress and some wonderful experiences for me to, my life has benefited from working with my Black colleagues, from my Hispanic colleagues, from my Asian friends. All of the diversity that we have in our caucus is really a reflection of what America is really all about.
Thank you. We have a couple questions that relate to what you talked about in terms of Israel before, and a couple of data points. Your colleague, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, pulled out of an event that is commemorating the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin, who was murdered and assassinated in Israel because of his pursuit of peace with the Palestinians. She decided not to attend that event because, I guess, of Prime Minister Rabin's overall history and role in Israel's presence in the West Bank, and there's legislation by some in the Democratic Party, and it was a proposal to the Platform Committee to condition U.S. aid to Israel on not making any changes in the status of the West Bank. And we're wondering what your position is on those things. And when you look at the West Bank, if you consider the whole thing to be the same thing, or if there's a difference in your mind between those areas that have become, or that really were even before 1948, Jewish areas that came back to Israeli control, or do you see it in black and white terms in terms of the West Bank and annexation?
Well, I don't think for my travels there's anything black and white about the West Bank. I'll certainly say that. I have had the chance to spend time both in Jewish settlements on the West Bank and obviously in Palestinian villages on the West Bank. And we've had a tremendous opportunity meeting with members of the parliament, Jewish and Arab, members of the government, briefed by all sides, if you will. My own personal opinion, first of all, I have strong support for the defense of Israel. I voted for every bill about American aid to Israel. And that my support for the democracy in Israel has not wavered and will not waver. What I do firmly believe, and this is from having visited there over the last 40 years and from the people that have briefed us over that time, I believe that a two-state solution is the best avenue for a peaceful resolution of a conflict there. Now, I should say, everyone agrees that that's not that the Palestinian nation would not have military. They would have police powers within their territory. But so it's not the typical what you would think of two countries next to each other, but there would be autonomy over day-to-day life. And I think without that, I just don't see a peaceful resolution. I don't see people ever coming to terms without having their autonomy. And that's shared by many, many, many people. In recent years, we've had a more, I guess you could say, conservative approach. Some would say a more belligerent approach. It's hard, it's hard to describe. But I think we have our best shot when we're working with our allies within the framework of a two-state solution. And part of the challenge, I believe, yes, there are territories where settlements might make sense, but also the settlements themselves are increasing. I don't think they're making people safer, is the way I would say it. I think they're increasing tensions. There's a just maze of walls now that have been built, just even in recent years since my previous visit, my most recent visit, walls that go all the way around a Palestinian village. And the only way to leave there is to go through a particular checkpoint. And if that checkpoint is slowed down in the morning and people can't get to work or can't earn a livelihood to care for their family, I think that weakens the economy. It weakens the fabric of the community. And I think personally that is threatening to people who are living in the West Bank. So that's the position I take. And I'm for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. And I will continue to support that process.
So the last question is not from the audience, but from me, and really relates to the polarized political environment that we are in. 4 years ago, when I was moderating this forum, I asked this question to both, at the time, Senator Ayotte and at the time candidate Hassan, is now our senator. And I asked them if they would, I issued an invitation to each of them, which they both accepted, which was to appear together, win or lose, a couple days after the election with myself and a group of local religious leaders to have some private conversation and then a brief public appearance to make a show of unity at a time when that is so important. And would you make that commitment to show up with your opponent, Mr. Negron, win or lose after the vote?
Absolutely.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. Well, we really want to thank you so much for being here, Representative Custer, for taking the time for us today, for your service to our state and our district, and for continuing to want to do this again and to approach us to ask for another chance for that. So we hope you have a good rest of the day, and thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity, and peace be to all of you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So we are moving on. We have with us State Senator Dan Feltes. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. As someone who has sometimes a badly pronounced last name, I hope I got that.
You got it.
Wonderful. And so my name is John Spiro-Savet. I am the moderator here today. I'm the rabbi at Temple Beth Abraham, sitting in my office. You might hear a little noise in the background of kids who are engaged in Jewish education, but I'll mostly be muted, and you'll mostly do the talking. I am here not really so much in my rabbi role, but just as someone to facilitate this conversation. This is a forum which takes place every time we have an election season. It is a very well-informed group of people who you are meeting, Senator Feltes, and so we hope that as you take the half hour that you have with us, that you'll be able to talk to us not from zero, but from as much specific as you can give us. Both in your opening presentation, you can take up to the first half to do that, and in response to questions. And I will call and formulate the questions that are submitted to me, and people can continue to submit them to me from the chat, and I'll convey them. And we want to welcome you and give you a chance, Senator Feltes. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi. I really appreciate it. And to everybody for having me. It's an honor and privilege to be here with you. I look forward to the conversation that we're about to have. And as Rabbi mentioned, I serve in the State Senate I have the honor and privilege of serving as Majority Leader of the State Senate and live in the south end of Concord on Hope Avenue with my wonderful wife, Erin, our two amazing daughters, Iris and Josie, and our two dogs, Franklin and Roosevelt. And I have a little bit of a different background than the current governor. I didn't come from a family of politicians. My dad wasn't governor. My brother wasn't a U.S. senator. My dad worked in a furniture factory for 45 years. The same furniture factory, doing roughly the same job, day in and day out in an air-conditioned furniture factory for 45 years. My mom, she did part-time work, including the night shift, while raising 4 kids. And the gifts they gave to me were the values of hard work, honesty and integrity, and looking out for everybody, especially those left out and left behind. Those are the values I've tried to live my entire life. First, right out of law school as a legal aid attorney with New Hampshire Legal Assistance for about a decade, fighting for low to middle income families and for seniors and for veterans, including helping people during the last economic crisis, the Great Recession, battle Wall Street banks who were foreclosing on folks all across New Hampshire, helping people get access to health insurance and job training and unemployment, helping people get back up on their feet. So many of the same people that are falling through the cracks right now in this public health and economic crisis were folks that fell through the cracks back then. Gotta look out for them. And 3 terms in the state Senate and as majority leader led the way on issues helping working people and families, including getting past the most progressive prescription drug relief bill in state history, importing safe, low-cost prescription drugs from Canada, capping out-of-pocket insulin expenses at $30 per month, benefiting roughly 130,000 Granite Staters living with diabetes, reauthorizing Medicaid expansion, which is critical to 50,000 roughly Granite Staters who need that health insurance, including to combat the opioid epidemic, cleaning up our water, looking out for workers, but all too often running up against the same obstacle to meaningful and inclusive and bipartisan progress in the state. That's the current governor, Chris Sununu, who's running for a rare 3rd term as governor. 79 record-setting vetoes, 65 of which had bipartisan support, a couple dozen of which had unanimous bipartisan support. Common sense initiatives to help move New Hampshire forward on everything from job training to clean energy to paid family and medical leave insurance to universal background checks to addiction treatment services to a whole budget. Fortunately, on the budget, after Governor Sununu vetoed it, and after he came to the table wanting the education funding out, leaders in the legislature, and I had the honor of being part of that team, said no. We ended up getting the biggest public school education budget in state history, securing $140 million in additional education support for our schools and for our communities, including finally doing full-day kindergarten like any other grade, untying kindergartners from Keno revenue, which was a preferred method by Governor Sununu, doing disparity aid for property poor school districts, $140 million in new support for our school districts, including on top of that, we made sure that we backfilled the so-called Title X money for reproductive health care services in the state and other healthcare services in the state. Roughly 16,000 Granite Staters, disproportionately women, were impacted by the so-called gag rule from the Trump administration. We saw it coming down the pike. We backfilled that funding. Although Chris Sununu didn't want it in, we kept it in. We said no. We supported those healthcare services on the ground. We also made strides on mental health and addiction treatment services in that budget. Unfortunately, right now, during a pandemic, Governor Chris Sununu has unilaterally cut a number of those measures out of the budget, including a provision I put in to provide prescription drug relief to low-income senior citizens, has been unilaterally cut out of the budget. Addiction treatment services has been cut out of the budget at a time when overdoses are going up and overdose deaths are going up. And key mental health provisions have not been stood up in implementing this budget. We got to move forward. We got to move forward together. I'm of that fundamental belief that we are all in this together, that in order to move New Hampshire forward, we can't afford to leave anyone behind. That we fight hard to lift one another up, not tear people down. We fight to include more people in our democracy and economy, not exclude them. And we need a relief and recovery effort that works for everyone in every community, not just those at the top, not just corporate special interests. That's what's at stake in this race. And there's a few other things I'll just highlight before we get to the conversation that's at stake in this race. Healthcare. It is the most important thing, generally speaking, but specifically speaking in the midst of a global pandemic. And there are distinct differences in this race on healthcare. I support keeping and strengthening Obamacare, including its implementation on the ground here in the state of New Hampshire. We have the highest healthcare costs in the nation right here in New Hampshire under Governor Chris Sununu. And Chris Sununu has a long history of supporting the repeal of Obamacare. In fact, when he was asked in 2016 why he supports Donald Trump, he said, "I support Donald Trump because, quote, he actually could finally end horrible programs like Obamacare," unquote. And he advocated for the repeal effort without a replacement at the federal level. It passed the US House, but fortunately Senator Hassan and Senator Shaheen, working with the late Senator John McCain, said no, and they did not repeal Obamacare and dealt a huge loss to the folks who wanted that, including Trump and Chris Sununu. But folks, Obamacare is going to have a US Supreme Court argument on November 10th, right after the election, on November 10th. And Trump is forcing through a nominee who has a long history of opposition and questioning the constitutionality of Obamacare. And think about that. By the end of this year, perhaps, Obamacare could be repealed, literally. And the impact is hundreds of millions of dollars that would otherwise come into New Hampshire. It's protections for pre-existing condition, it's community rating, it's price caps, it's Medicaid expansion, among many others, including essential health benefits. They're all critical right now, especially in this pandemic. So the difference on healthcare couldn't be more than night and day in this race. We have to move forward on healthcare. We have a healthcare plan on our website about how we move forward and deal with behavioral health, deal with addiction treatment services, and deal with this pandemic. You can take a look at it on our website, which is danfeltusnh.com. On choice, there are big differences on choice too. I'm pro-choice. My opponent says he is around election time, and then every action and conduct in between is actually the opposite. He vetoed insurance coverage for reproductive health care services. He diverted COVID CARES Act relief money to so-called anti-choice, quote-unquote, counseling centers. He supported the nomination and confirmation of judges that would work to make abortion illegal, and he voted at least one time to cut off funding for Planned Parenthood. That, to me, does not speak of a record of someone who's pro-choice. And there is an open Supreme Court position at New Hampshire Supreme Court. And Governor Chris Sununu nominated a conservative activist, was rejected by the Executive Council, and then has held open that post for now 16 months because he wants to nominate the exact same person. I have said I will nominate a pro-choice woman to the New Hampshire Supreme Court because the states are going to be, in all likelihood, the last line of defense on key rights, not just abortion rights, but workers' rights and healthcare. And we need someone who's going to stand up for that on the New Hampshire Supreme Court. And we need a governor, in my view, who's going to stand up for those basic rights as well. So there's so much at stake in this race. And, you know, we're going to have a conversation about a number of issues, I'm sure. But I just wanted to respectfully ask you for your vote. But more than that, I wanted to respectfully ask you to vote. In the words of Justice Brandeis, there's no more important role in a democracy than that of citizen. Not governor, not state senator, citizen. So everything you do and say counts. It matters in your community. It matters in the greater New Hampshire community. And play that role and get your friends and your family to get out and vote. And if you vote for me or not, when we win this race, I'm going to be a governor for everybody because that's what public service is about, looking out for everybody as best as you can. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So during this pandemic, we get a daily dashboard, citizens from the government and from the news, those who we have lost and those who become sick and recovered. What other things do you think are important to be on the dashboard that you would use as governor? Measures related to other aspects of well-being, to children, to economics. What are all the kinds of things that you would be looking at constantly, and how would you be integrating them into a whole picture to help you approach a holistic approach to living and governing during the pandemic?
Thank you very much, Rabbi. I think it is important to do the press conferences, but I also think it's important to provide a full picture of what's going on. So Granite Staters know exactly what's going on, and beyond that, how to get out of this in a way that makes sense. Right now, what you haven't heard at the press conferences is that our numbers are spiking dramatically and escalating far faster in New Hampshire than in many other places in the country. We have worse numbers than either Maine or Vermont. And we have cases and outbreaks bubbling up in schools around the state. And we have outbreaks in nursing homes around the state. And I think it's critical to talk about and provide information on all of that information, including right now, the things that are reported in terms of schools is the number of children that has been concluded to contract COVID in school rather than the number of school children with COVID. We should know the full picture and know the full picture in our communities, especially with respect to schools. There's some big differences of opinion about this in this race. When it came to schools, literally the effort was, it's tough. We're not going to make a public health plan for our schools. We're going to punt to local control. And Donald Trump punted it down too, and Chris Sununu punted it down just like Trump to the local level with 5 or 6 weeks to go before school started. And with people wondering what are going to be the public health standards at the state level for our schools and looking for clear guidance and standards, what happened was it was a punt. And I know the argument is local control, but it's not like the virus changes when it's in Manchester or Nashua or Portsmouth. And our local school officials and folks that are on school boards are not epidemiologists. They're signing up to serve their community in good faith. And they're grappling with this. So right now there's chaos, literally chaos at the local level with our schools because there hasn't been a plan to deal with it. There needs to be a plan. I believe it's not enough to simply criticize Trump and Sununu for not doing anything on schools. So we put forward a plan. We called it Live Free and Learn Safe. It's a function of conversations with public health experts, including former commissioner of HHS, Ned Helms, families and parents, educators on the ground, administrators. You can take a look at the plan. I'll be the first to admit it's not perfect, but a plan is better than no plan at all. And that's what we need. And that's how you put forward a plan and you put forward measures of accountability and then you report on them. So, you're seeing schools all around the state closing down. They never had the support that they should have gotten. In addition to that, I think we need more data and information about what's going on in our nursing homes and assisted living facilities. New York Times recent report ranks New Hampshire literally worse in the nation in terms of what's going on in our nursing homes. And we had passed legislation to do an independent review of what went wrong and provide the financial support, PPE testing, and additional financial support, including for Medicaid receiver facilities. That was vetoed. So we didn't have that review. There was no independent review of what went wrong, and now we have more and more outbreaks. So we are very much in the early stages. I hate to say it, but I think you have to be honest and say, we are in the early stages. All the medical experts say this. We are in the early stages of COVID, actually. This is not going away anytime soon. And now is not the time to take any victory lap on COVID. Now is the time to look forward, create concrete plans, and deal with this in a common sense way. And in addition to that, Rabbi, I would add, we can't talk about this without talking about healthcare because it implicates healthcare across our entire system. And we've had hospitals lay folks off. We've had a couple facilities go under. We've had CARES Act relief money not go out to our providers in the way that it should to maintain the existing healthcare system. And beyond that, it's essential in that we protect Obamacare. If Obamacare goes away, literally a good chunk of these facilities, especially our critical access hospitals and a lot of our community mental health centers, will go under in a time of pandemic. So I can't emphasize enough how much is at stake in this race, particularly in healthcare. And so we need to know more about how our healthcare facilities are doing. You don't hear that at the press conferences. And they haven't really been helped. Maybe that's why, I don't know. But we need to, I think, baseline information about how our healthcare infrastructure and facilities and providers are doing is something that I think would be provided and should be provided as part of a dashboard and needs to be a priority and in a more global sense, protecting and strengthening Obamacare.
Are there communities in our state or other states or even other places internationally that you consider success stories that have done this work well at a community level that you would want to either imitate or adapt from day one as governor to the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, there are models, and in fact, there was a recent report that was done by an academic research outfit, but was reported on by Political, which highlights some best practices from some other states. In addition to that, other countries have implemented some best practices, including on testing and contract tracing. South Korea, for example, country of 51 million people, has 430 deaths. We in New Hampshire, state of 1.36 million, have 460 deaths. So less deaths in South Korea, and everybody who's looked at it, the medical experts conclude the aggressive testing and contract tracing methods and making sure their healthcare system was really up to snuff on the local level. People credit to that. We need to be better on testing without a doubt. That's one feature of what we need to move forward on, including rapid testing, which has an implication for our economy as well. So, when you have childcare facilities that a kid goes out and the policy, and reasonably so, if there are symptoms, is the kid can't go back, have a negative COVID test. If the absence of access to rapid testing and affordability of rapid testing implicates how fast kids can get back into childcare, kids can get back in school, teachers can get back into school, which implicates our entire economy at large. So testing and rapid testing deployment is critical.
So even with the Affordable Care Act, and if it stays intact, health premiums in New Hampshire are high, whether you're in the individual market or even in a group market through an employer. What kinds of actions do you think you could take or the state should take to continue to reduce premiums and keep costs down?
You're absolutely right, Rabbi. We actually have the highest healthcare costs in the nation right here in New Hampshire. Highest premiums, highest co-pays, highest deductibles. It's hurting families, it hurts businesses, it hurts our opportunity to grow. We need to control costs, bring down costs. There's a number of different ways to do it. We've laid out a number of methods in our healthcare plan, but we need the Obamacare exchange to exist, and we need to foster competition on the exchange, and we need more transparency and pricing at the local level. In addition, the reason why most health care economists and analysis, including the UNH Health Policy Institute, indicate that the absence of preventative care is the principal driver of our costs. In other words, things like having behavioral health care, actual treatment capacity for mental health and substance use disorder services means that those particular situations don't get to a level where it's more cost intensive to treat, number one. And number two, folks don't end up in the emergency room, which is the most cost intensive way to treat people. And those costs get spread over everybody. So just a couple things on this. First, been working on this issue for a long time, including as a legal aid lawyer, getting access to helping people get access to treatment. And in the state Senate, breaking down prior authorization barriers by health insurance companies to make sure that providers and people on the ground get access, but also building up the infrastructure. And I can tell you that the night that I decided, actually my wife Erin encouraged me to run, was the night we failed to override one of Governor Sununu's vetoes on a particular piece of legislation. It was on addiction treatment services. We had passed the bill 24-0 out of the state Senate. Serving as majority leader, we got all the Republicans, we worked together, we got it done. We bolstered addiction treatment services and capacity on the ground. It was vetoed. And then because it was necessary to move forward on, we scheduled a veto override vote right away. And unfortunately, our Republican friends changed their votes. We were unable to override the veto. It turns out that Governor Chris Sununu had told their caucus that their vote on veto override is not about the issue or the constituents. This is public now. He said it's not about the issues or the constituents, it's about me and protecting my veto. And that to me was disheartening. And I went home, and I'm an optimistic guy, and I was talking with Erin, and she said, well, what are you gonna do about it? And so that's when we decided to run. And when I say at the outset, Rabbi, that the barrier to meaningful bipartisan and inclusive progress is the current governor, I mean it. You may not see a lot of it out there, but that's why I'm doing this, because we got to make progress on these key issues. And these key issues, including addiction treatment services, will bring down costs because people will stop going to the emergency room for treatment, and situations won't escalate to a point in which they're more cost intensive to treat.
What's your position on income tax for the state and on a proposal that was in the last session that would have added a capital gains tax in addition to interest and dividends, something which particularly affects older granite staters?
So let me be 1,000% clear. I oppose an income tax. I would veto an income tax should it would reach my desk as governor. And I've been clear about that. And so all this stuff that you see out there with these ads and whatnot is just a bunch of baloney, and it's why people don't like politics. In terms of cap gains, certainly open to that, but you got to do it in a way that makes sense, and including increasing exemptions that haven't been increased for a while, including on interest and dividends. Those need to be re-upped. If you do it in a way that makes sense, you end up cutting taxes for more people and by closing that loophole, if you can do it in a common sense way. And that's some of the ways that has been crafted. And that's the only way I would support it, is if exemptions are substantially increased. And so, look, we need to make sure that senior citizens and property taxpayers don't continue to take it on the chin. Part of the way that we do that is making the system more fair, and those at the very top pay more of their fair share. But like I said, you got to do it in a way that those exemptions go up substantially.
How do you think about the commuter rail to Boston and what you really regard as the actual economic benefits of that project if you support it? And if you do support it, how would you move it forward?
I do support it. And there's been a lot of work on this. And this is about economic development. It's about jobs. And it's about combating the climate crisis. It's about how we move forward together with good infrastructure projects. We've moved forward to some degree on it. We got the engineering study underway, but it's certainly behind the schedule that it should have been on. And you can do it with the public-private partnerships that have been created. And I would suggest that you do it in a way that promotes workforce and affordable housing along the corridor. And that's what other communities have done in other states when they've done a commuter rail. And we have a workforce affordable housing problem in the state of New Hampshire. To me, it's an opportunity to link the two and to really spur investment and economic activity, and both create jobs. And so I think the jobs of tomorrow are in infrastructure projects, housing, clean energy, broadband, and healthcare. And we need to move forward on that. And I support it, and we'll continue to advance it.
You testified about the Holocaust education bill that just became law.
Yep.
And why was that important to you? What were you seeing? And what do you think will be the actual on the ground impact of this law?
Well, we saw a number of incidents not too far from where I live in the south end of Concord. Rabbi Robin Nafshi, who you may know, Temple Beth Jacob was receiving threats. They actually had, police officers stationed there for a period of time. And not only that, a number of folks received comments, and there was escalating levels of comment. And supporting that legislation to me meant let's advance and move forward with educating our kids that they don't forget. They don't forget about the history here, and they don't forget, and they know what this is all about. That maybe if even one kid understood that these aren't things that you should even joke about, and that's critical. And so we got that through. And I think it was critical to get through. And I think we need to continue to build a more inclusive democracy and economy in our state. And people of all different faiths need to be included. And the education system needs to reflect the reality of the history of what people faced. And so that's why I believe strongly in it. And that's why it was an honor to help get it through.
You made a couple of references to housing, and there's a study that New Hampshire is short about 20,000 units of affordable housing, particularly for lower income people. Is there any chance that we could make a meaningful dent in that in a way that would cause prices to be reasonable and actually just to develop that capacity? What would make you think that we have the either financial or developer capacity to attack it on a scale of more than 10 here or 100 there?
Well, thank you, Rabbi. As a legal aid lawyer for about 10 years, 4 of them, I directed the Housing Justice Project at New Hampshire Legal Assistance, including doing the statewide analysis of impediments to fair housing choice and to affordable housing. And certainly there's a gap, a huge gap, and it disproportionately affects people who need it most. Nationwide, the vacancy rate is about 5% in rental housing. In New Hampshire, it's about 1.5%, which means in most places you can't find a place to live. And if you do, no pun intended, the prices are through the roof. So this is an economic issue too, not just the right thing to do to move forward on. We did in the last budget, we capitalized the Workforce Affordable Housing Fund at the statewide level, setting aside the first $5 million in real estate transfer tax revenue to do that. It's something surrounding states do, and that fund leverages private and federal infrastructure and housing monies to the tune of anywhere from $7 to $15 for every dollar we put in, depending on the project. And so other states have done this, Rabbi, around us, and we're losing out because we hadn't done it. So we just did it. It's just moving forward. There was an area of disagreement between myself and the governor, but ultimately he signed the budget with it in. But we need to move forward on it. And that's part of a housing plan we actually laid out. As far as we've been told, it's the first time that a candidate for governor laid out a housing plan, but it's a critical issue for all of us. So we got a housing plan on our website. You can take a look at it. Beyond the infrastructure development and increasing supply, we need to deal with some of the unreasonable restrictions, including impact fees and density at the local level. And on top of that, we have to make sure that we deal with the housing programs that we have in a way that makes sense. We ramped up the housing and rapid rehousing fund in the budget. Unfortunately, that was unilaterally cut by Chris Sununu out of the budget, that increase. But housing and stabilizing people in housing, that housing first model, we know produces really beneficial outcomes down the road. So rapid rehousing programs, making sure people who are homeless can get into housing as quickly as possible, can afford the security deposit, that kind of thing. In addition to that, in our housing plan, we laid out finally doing some state level Section 8 vouchers, including targeting families who are chronically homeless, including targeting veterans. Other states have done this. We have not yet in New Hampshire created our own state voucher program, but we propose doing that in our housing plan and would do it and propose it in our budget.
Thank you. Senator Feltus, we really want to thank you for being here, for taking time with us this morning, for your service so far to date, and for wanting to serve us in these other ways and coming to ask us for our support. So good luck. We hope you have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. Take care.
We are moving along, and we have Steve Negron with us. And if I mispronounce your name, please forgive me and help correct me. Mr. Negron is running for the U.S. House of Representatives, representing District 2, and has the support and the endorsement of the Republican Party in the state. You've been with us before for this forum, so I'll just tell you that, so I'm John Spiro-Savet. I'm moderating today. I'm the rabbi at the synagogue, but really not in my religious role at all, just helping to facilitate the questions coming your way, and just encourage you. We've got about a half an hour. We're running 5 minutes behind. We'll give you your full half hour if you're able to stay. And we may need to work on your microphone. You're a little fuzzy.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're kind of staticky.
I can get my tech guy in here.
Yeah, see if you can do that. I'll vamp for a minute while you work on that. And we'll just remind you, we are a very well-informed audience, despite the fact that I said I wasn't sure how to pronounce your name. And but actually I've been keeping up, and would just love to hear as much concrete and specific as we can, both in your opening statement, which you're welcome to take up to half the time for, and in the questions and answers. Again, I want to encourage everybody here to submit or even resubmit questions through the chat that you'd like to make sure that I ask, and let's give you the floor.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's great.
You can hear me? Good.
Yes, yeah.
All right. There goes my tech assist. She's gone. Well, thank you very much, Rabbi, for the opportunity to come in and to address you guys. This is on a beautiful, gorgeous fall New England day. This reminds me how special it is for all of us to live in this country and to be able to have an opportunity that I have right now to run again for Congress. So, yes, I'm a repeat nominee. You guys do remember that I was the nominee in 2018. And I think that's important because our second congressional district is just so geographically challenging. And we know that in 2014, the nominee did not come back in 2016, and in 2016, the nominee did not come back in 2018. So in 2018, when we ran, we always looked at it as the first of two halves. And regardless of the outcome of what was going to happen in 2018, my family and I made an investment, both from time and resources, to know that, sometimes you have to lay the seed, and then maybe the first crop season, it doesn't bear fruit, but the second time it will. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. We in 2018, we did come up short, but we did garner 117,990 votes, which was the most votes in a midterm since 2002. So we knew that we had a message. It resonated with the folks of New Hampshire, and that's why we decided to come back. I don't know if you've seen, but the UNH just came out on Thursday with their latest poll. And we were 4 points behind Congresswoman Custer with a plus or minus 4. So we're looking at this as a dead heat. And it's a dead heat because people want to have an ability to know that they have a voice down in Washington. We famously say that we don't want to bring the water of Washington to New Hampshire. We want to bring crisp, clean New Hampshire water down in Washington. And so what we've seen, in our opinion, over the last 8 years is someone who now knows, who now actually shows by action that they're more beholden to big dollars outside of the state of New Hampshire, and really to the Speaker Pelosi, because you'll see that, you know, the Congresswoman that I'm running against, and my opponent, votes with Pelosi 100% of the time. And the truth of the matter is that our state is a very unique state. There are things out here that are unique to us that, quite frankly, here in the campaign office, I often say, just like we used to say with my kids watching Sesame Street, what's the word of the day? And for us, the word of the day is courage. The word of the day is courage, because sometimes you have to make a stand that flies in the face of your party because it's what's in the best interest of the state. And I think some people that go to Washington, my competitor included, is they get intoxicated with Washington, D.C., and they believe that that's who they have to then answer to. The truth of the matter is that we answer, in our case, to the folks of the 2nd Congressional District. That's our boss. That's my boss. You know, people ask me, why did I do this? And I got to tell you, it isn't something that I had to do. I'm retired military. I have my own business, but it absolutely is something that I wanted to do, because when I was in the State House, I sat on the election law committee. And the thing that was most profound to me is that people would drive 2.5 hours for 5 minutes of the time of the committee because they fundamentally thought that they had a voice, that they fundamentally thought that this government would actually listen to them and they could affect change. And the truth of the matter is we've lost that. We've lost that from our representative that's actually doing it for us down in Washington. And it's clear like that because right now we now know that when we knock on doors and we talk to folks on the phones, the one thing that's actually moving the needle, it isn't the fact that I'm a pro-life candidate. It isn't the fact that I'm a big constitutionalist and a Second Amendment person. The thing that's moving the needle is the fact that this COVID-19 pandemic has them worried, and safety in their neighborhoods has them worried. They look across this great country and they see the things that are happening in Seattle, in Portland just 2 nights ago, Kenosha, Wisconsin. And oh, by the way, Kenosha isn't a big metropolis. Kenosha is 100,000 people. That's Manchester. And that's just a little bit bigger than Nashua. So it's at our doorstep. And, you know, we need to be able to know that the men and women of law enforcement have the backing, not only of the folks here in the great state, but of the congressional candidates that are out there that supposedly representing the great state of New Hampshire. I was very fortunate last week to get the endorsement of the New Hampshire Police Association, something that they normally don't give to Republicans. And the reason why I was able to get that endorsement is because they understood that I knew what it was that they did every day. You know, there is legislation that my opponent actually signed on as a sponsor to get rid of what we know as qualified immunity. And that's something that absolutely is moving the needle for law enforcement. You know, we have them, men and women, to go out every day to protect us and protect our neighborhoods. And the thing that we forget oftentimes is that there's a family that they leave behind every time they go do guard mount or shift change. And we need to make sure that we understand that as well. I'm the son of a retired Air Force service member. And when my father was in Southeast Asia for 2 tours, I remember when he left, we used to watch Dan Rather on CBS News, and we used to see the names scrolling down through the screen, and would always watch to see if my dad was going to be on that list. So I know clearly what the men and women of blue do every day. And, you know, my opponent doesn't believe that they have to be protected in that way. And so there's some very stark contrast differences. I'm not beholden to anyone. You know, I'm beholden to the folks of the 2nd Congressional, because I know without them, I wouldn't be in Washington. But now it's been 8 years. And I think what we've heard and we've seen is that they're ready for a new change. They're ready to start building our future. And I think that I bring an opportunity for a new voice down in Washington. My grandmother used to famously say, I have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. I should be listening more than talking. And I take that to heart. And I think that's what we've seen. And that's why this race is so close. And I think the folks of New Hampshire are now ready for change, and I'm looking forward for that opportunity come November 3rd. So Rabbi, I'll stop there, sir, and I'll take any questions you might have.
Wonderful, and thank you for being here. And the questions I'm giving you come almost entirely through the group who are here meeting with us. When it comes to COVID-19, there are so many impacts, the obvious ones to life and death and to health and all kinds of other impacts to our families, to our kids, to people who work. How do you balance and integrate all of those impacts and what you think should be the strategy of our state and our communities toward them? Is there anything fundamentally different than what Governor Sununu and the local authorities have been doing that you think New Hampshire should be doing?
Sure, that's a great question, Rabbi. One of the things that I've said, and hopefully you guys will tune in on Thursday at 7:00, which is the last WMUR debate with myself and my opponent, is look, I respect this pandemic, but I don't fear it. And early on when we started, we really didn't know where we were, but we clearly now know that there's a universe of individuals that we absolutely must protect. And we must be doing everything we possibly can, whether it's assisted living facilities or actually in-home care as well. You know, a lot of times everybody talks about these actual brick and mortar facilities, but we also have those kind of nuances with in-home care as well. I think the governor has done a good job. I'm a small business owner. I got to tell you, I was impacted by COVID-19. I had to lay some people off, but I did participate in the PPP or the Payroll Protection Program, which I think was a good thing and actually helped companies like mine and many others across the state. But I don't think it was ever intended to be a long-term issue. I think you have to have this balance, Rabbi, to your point, of bringing us to a point where we were able to bridge the gap with the stimulus spending, but then let the economy get back out there, be very judicious and very smart in your approach to make sure that you don't actually put more folks at risk of the population that we know are more susceptible, but get the economy back going. You know, my opponent wants us to stay at home, not go out, not do anything. And I don't share that feeling. I believe right now that people want to come. Here in Nashua, there's been 2 days of parents, not politicos, but parents that want to talk to the superintendent and letting the schools open. You know, we don't know what the second, third, and fourth order effects are because of COVID, because we stayed at home. We don't know what the mental health issues are for people that had mental health issues before the pandemic, or children who need to socialize, who need to go out and need to actually find maybe some natural antibodies to these things. You know, those are the things that I think we need to be doing. And I think we're slowly getting to that point. You know, this first stimulus package, and I'm a huge fiscal hawk. I think that one of the greatest threats to this country is our national debt and deficit. And we've thrown a lot more. Some of it is justified. I believe we spent a lot of things that we didn't have to going forward. I think we need to be really, really judicious about what it is that we're putting out there. You know, I always say that there's a litmus test. If it doesn't affect the COVID-19 issue specifically, then it's off the table for me. So look, we still have, I was just with the governor the other day, our unemployment rate went from 17, we're down back, I think it's 4. We're slowly opening up. Our meals and hospitality kind of environment took a hit. You know, we had outdoor seating, but we have to be realistic about, you know, fall and winter are coming up. So let's just take an approved approach. Let's not be fearful of this thing. Let's be who we are naturally. Let's find out how we can put some things in place that's going to help everybody. And I think that's the way we're going to get out of this, is having trust in the place and the people. Let small business get back to work. And I think that's how it's going to help everybody all together.
So if you're elected in January or soon after, there would be potentially other proposals in the Congress to spend money on different aspects, as you say, that could be targeted in different ways. Of the things that you've seen that are on the table, either from the administration or the House or the Senate, which of the ones would you support, if any, spending money on going forward?
Absolutely. One of the things you have to look at is that how do I, certainly for individuals that have lost wages, is there a way to be able to help those? The double edge of this knife is that those people that now were getting some of this money on unemployment were making more money on unemployment than they were being employed. And so I know a lot of small business owners like myself that are having very difficult times rehiring people because they're making more money on unemployment. I don't think that was necessarily the objective, but I think that's a second order effect that's out there. But if there's an opportunity for people to get some money to help the business get through with a longer period of a payback period with a low interest rate. Look, nobody's looking for handouts. They just want an ability to help bridge the gap until the economy is getting to where we were, I believe, in a pre-COVID-19 situation. That's what I would look at. I wouldn't look at, Rabbi, those kind of things that I don't think should be in some of these stimulus packages. If it helps an individual, if it helps a small business that's out there to get back to a point where they can stand on their own, I absolutely would look at those things as a holistic view of getting the economy back, and specifically in New Hampshire.
On the healthcare and the Affordable Care Act, there have been a lot of discussion recently about pre-existing conditions. And if the Supreme Court next year strikes down the act, or if a Congress were to repeal it, there's a lot of talk about protecting pre-existing conditions. That, of course, would cost a lot of money. For pre-existing condition means a condition that somebody needs to pay for treatment for. And simply legislating a mandate wouldn't address how that would be paid for. To what extent would you think that guarantee should or shouldn't be universal? And if it should be, how should it be paid for?
Right, that's a great question. We were just talking about it here today in the campaign office. Look, I agree with being able to cover pre-existing conditions. You know, prior to the ACA coming aboard, you had potential healthcare insurers not being able to cover, or if they did, the cost would be astronomical. I think one of the things that makes things so expensive is the natural cost of healthcare. I think how you approach this thing isn't singularly by having a mandate, but how do I bring costs down of healthcare altogether? And I believe one of the things now is that, you know, right now, and I think that the state of New Hampshire, we only have 2 or 2.5 healthcare insurers that are in this state. And I think we have to lower barriers to entry to let other people's come in, and it becomes a competitive market. I'm a huge free market guy. I believe you have to look at things like, you know, right now, I can go across state lines and get auto insurance and home insurance and boat insurance. I don't know why I'm precluded from doing those things right now in the healthcare industry. So I look at some things and how I would be able to open up the markets, bring down the barriers to entry. And I think when you do that, then the overall cost of healthcare is going to come down. One of the things that's being talked about a lot is the cost of prescription medication. You know, for 8 years, my opponent has been in Washington, and, you know, you look at Medicaid Part D, why can't we renegotiate it? You know, why is that such a sacrosanct or a sacred cow? I don't think it should be. You know, what I hear from people is that they can go to Canada and get the exact same prescription at 80% of the cost. That, to me, that just doesn't, you know, pass the litmus test. Why is that, right? And are there entities out there that are taking government money and government grant money to actually develop some of these things and all of a sudden turn around and actually, and pardon my expression, but stick it to the American people? That's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. So there are some things I believe that we can actually bring the cost of healthcare down. And when you do that, then the cost of then covering a pre-existing condition will be minimized. And I think that's how we get to a point that healthcare is both affordable and accessible to all Americans.
We're going to go kind of back and forth between different kinds of issues. The U.S.-Israel alliance is of great importance to us who are here on the call with you. How do you see that alliance, and how do you see it going forward? And what do you see as the future approach to the U.S. role in the Israel-Palestinian conflict? Can't hear you. Not yet. Let's see. Is there anything on our end? Can our folks?
There we go. Oh,
good. Oh, sorry. We lost you again.
Here we go. Having lived overseas, specifically in Spain for 7 years, and then having been in the military, I know firsthand how important our relationship with Israel is. Certainly my perspective from being a military guy and working DoD acquisitions, and how we know that there's such a staunch ally for us in the Middle East, the only one that has always stood by the United States through all of the situations that we've had. You know, I shake my head sometimes in amazement that people have this position that Israel isn't one of our staunchest allies. The whole thing, which I supported completely, President Trump moving the embassy back to Jerusalem, even though other presidents in the previous had always said that they would, it was only President Trump that actually made that come to fruition. So I believe our relationship with Israel, and I support Israel 100%. There's a rabbi that I know in Boston that I've worked with a lot about trying to get on it's called the Guardian Fund, which is a political action committee that supports veterans. And tell you what, sometimes I just like to just sit and chat with him. He's just an incredible, incredible guy. But we need to move forward, and we need to solidify our relationship with Israel, both from an economic and also both from a partnership in the Middle East, and certainly in my role in the Department of Defense with them as a staunch ally in the Middle East. So I am 100% proponent of making sure not only do we push that relationship forward, we strengthen it, because that's how I think that we're going to be able to do some of the things that we're working on in the Middle East right now, but we can't do it alone. And absolutely, we have to do it shoulder to shoulder with the country of Israel.
The racial justice protests of this year and the general overall renewed conversations around racial tension and justice have caused a lot of us to ask what it is that maybe we haven't been doing or we haven't known about before. What has it caused you to think about or wonder about that you maybe hadn't? What has it brought to the forefront for you? And have you read anything new or had any new conversations that are different than the ones you were having a year ago on these issues?
Sure. Well, certainly a year ago, the whole idea of this systemic racism wasn't even on anybody's radar. I'm 100% Hispanic, and I've seen it growing up. I've experienced racism. I tell the story, it wasn't that long ago in the early 80s, I was seeing a young lady and her father wanted me to join a very prominent social club. And I fill out the application. I remember I was with them at dinner and he goes, Steve, everybody wants you. It was all thumbs up from the executive committee, but you have to take off the fact that you're Hispanic. And I said, why? I don't understand. I'm still the same person. And he goes, I know it's silly. It's not a big deal. I said, but it is a big deal. And so as a person that's 100% minority, is there a way for us to get better? Absolutely. We're not a perfect country. And are there individuals that have these misguided opinions on somebody, both from a religious perspective or a race perspective or ethnicity perspective? You bet. But it's not an indictment, in my opinion, in my most humble opinion, it's not an indictment against this country as a whole. My father, who came here from Puerto Rico and grew up in Midtown in New York City, I remember talking to him about how he couldn't go from block to block without somebody saying something to him. And I look at it, are we better today than we were in 1960 or 70? I think we are. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. And I think this unrest that you see out there is that people are taking this overt action to try to divide this country by using race as an issue. And I, for one, I can tell you, I don't subscribe to this holistic approach that this whole country is racist. I don't see that. I can tell you in the 31 years I've lived in the great state of New Hampshire, that's never once happened to me personally. It's never once happened to my children. And so this great state is welcoming and wants that. But I have to tell you, there are pockets of unrest that are out there and it needs to be addressed. But, Congresswoman Custer has not once condemned any of the activity that happened in Portland or Seattle or Kenosha or Rochester, New York, and those things, if you want to have a position and if you want to be heard, there's ways to go about it. I don't believe the violence in the streets is any way to have your position heard. Let's sit down. I believe everybody has a voice. The Constitution provides those protections. Me as a man of faith knows that everybody was created in the image of God. And those are the things that are important. I just won't go down the rabbit hole of trying to say that my country is this racist country. Are there areas that we can improve? You bet. And we should. But it's not this systemic position that I think that people want us to believe in.
What is your position on the commuter rail between Boston and southern New Hampshire?
Well, I heard that when you were talking to Senator Dan Feltus. So I live in Nashua, and I commute every day when I was able to commute every day down to Burlington, Mass. And, the thing is, the commuter rail is not the end all. What we need to do is have an environment that we can bring business into New Hampshire. That's what we need to do first. We need to bring down the cost of for example, of utilities so that people can come in here and manufacturing can come back here and bring the jobs here. The fact that we just have a rail, in my opinion, the rail goes both ways. That means that if we don't have the jobs and the infrastructure here in New Hampshire to keep people here, then all the rail does is provide another mechanism for people to leave the great state of New Hampshire and to go down into Massachusetts to be able to find employment. The real kicker here is not the rail. The real kicker is how do we get industry and businesses into the state of New Hampshire? And then once we see that working, then I think we can talk about rail, but I think rail by itself isn't the thing that is going to fix our problem.
What's your approach to the long-term solvency for Social Security?
Right. Well, you know, one of the things we have when you look at Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, it's very clear that we need to do something about it. Right now, I think of Social Security, if we do nothing, then by 2032, it becomes insolvent. So we need to look at a way to provide Social Security for those people that are depending upon it now. But I think the equation needs to change moving forward. It's just very simple. And again, you'll hear me quote my grandmother, very smart woman. She goes, you know, you got gazintas and you got gazatas. And if you have more gazatas than gazintas, then it's not going to work. And I know that's very simplistic, but that's what we have to look at. You know, we have more people, our demographic of this country, we have more people drawing on Social Security than people putting in. So we have to be honest with each other and say we have to look at doing something that's going to reface what Social Security is. Because if we do nothing, it's going to be insolvent for those people that are coming behind. And look, I want my children, all three of them, to keep on working and keep on putting in Social Security so they can take care of me. But the truth is, what's going to happen to them? And we need to look at something, and it's an honest discussion that has to happen. It isn't about just doing away with Social Security. It's about, let's figure out the entire gamut of those people, the young ones that are just coming into the marketplace now and in the job arena, to those that are retiring and using it. How do we make sure that it's going to be there for everybody going forward? I believe we can do those kind of things, but we have to be honest with each other and get to the table and just figure out how we fix it.
This is a kind of just general question. Is there any issue that you think you've profoundly changed your approach to over the last 5 or 10 years? Maybe not just learned a little bit and adjusted, but really looked at from a different angle because of something you've experienced or something you've read?
Sure. And I got to tell you, we always talked about Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare until I got that very first piece of mail from AARP, right? That I said, okay, I've arrived, right? So now my outlook is a little bit different, right? So now I realize that I'm getting to that point. I'll be 60 next month. I'm getting to that point now that it isn't something that's down the road, right? The road is here now. And so that has really given me an opportunity to look at things a little bit differently, you know, because as somebody who's 20 or 30, I'll be totally honest with you. I used to say, that's something that's down the road. Well, you know what? The road's here. And I wish I would have the knowledge and the experience back when I was 30, right? Youth is wasted on the young. And now we have to realize that how do we do some things to make sure that those things are there for us moving forward, but at the same time, making it a little bit more robust and being able to handle this transition that we're in. And so I got to be honest with you, that's one of the things that has given me time and pause to make sure that I understand it better and moving forward, because there's a huge demographic out there that is looking to me and those in Congress and Senate to make sure that they have something moving forward.
Well, this last question I have is me on behalf of me and some others. We are in a time of political polarization that is different from just disagreement. You and your opponents certainly have differences on the issues, sure, and it's good and always appropriate for those to be strong and to criticize each other, but we're in a different kind of environment right now. And a few years ago at this forum, in 2016, I got a pledge from both, at the time, Senator Ayotte and now Senator Hassan, who were running against each other, that they would meet together and with myself and a group of local clergy right within a couple days after the election for private conversation and then for a public show together of unity. And they both made that pledge on the spot. I asked Congresswoman Custer to make this pledge, which she accepted. I want to issue this invitation to you on behalf of myself and a handful of other clergy in Nashua. Would you meet together with her and with us a couple days after the election, win or lose, to talk together and then to go out and present a face of unity to our district?
Without a doubt. You know, it's really funny. I grew up as a young man in the 80s, and the thing that still resonates with me, Rabbi, is I used to see President Reagan and Tip O'Neill shoulder to shoulder in the Rose Garden, talking about great.
But you're good to knock with the hooks of GOP.
With great, you know, because when you come together, at the end of the day, we probably agree with each other about 80%. And President Reagan used to say, if you agree with me 80% of the time, you're not my enemy. So absolutely, Rabbi, I wholeheartedly would take that invitation. I look forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Thank you for taking this time to spend.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. You all have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, we are in our home stretch here and are welcoming, can put the spotlight on Matt Mowers. I think I can do that. And we want to welcome you here to this Southern New Hampshire Jewish Men's Club Forum. I don't know if you've been at this forum before, but it's a very long-standing political forum. We think one of the best because of the people who come and the well-informed audience and our desire really to hear specifics about the things that are on our minds. And we appreciate your everybody here sticking around through what's been a series of candidate appearances, and we appreciate your patience in coming and in being our I guess our cleanup hitter here this morning. And the forum is that really you're going to hear. We'll give you a chance over this half hour, and you can have the full half hour to take up to half of it if you like for any opening things you'd like to say to us, and then I'll just be collecting questions that are submitted and convey them to you. And we look forward for a chance to hear from you and talk. You are our candidate for the United States House of Representatives from the 1st District of New Hampshire with the support of the Republican Party, and it's so good to welcome you here.
Rabbi, thank you so much for having me. And you know, I hope I didn't draw the short straw being the last speaker between you and lunch, likely. But I appreciate you taking the time, you know, 16 days out from the election to get to know everyone, ask some important questions, and really have a great conversation. And so, you know, I'll just kind of start off on top with a couple of thoughts as well as a little bit about my background. And then really I want to answer any questions you have, because I'd much rather talk about what you have on your mind than just what I have on my mind. I get to sit around with what's on my mind all day. So really look forward to talking to everyone. But, you know, my wife and I live over in Bedford, and, you know, we love it here. But, you know, my background, really, my roots started in a middle-class family. I mean, my dad worked in marine construction. So he built pipelines and piers and bridges and things like that. For years, he was actually a deep water sea diver. You know, one of the guys who went, you know, thousands of feet underneath the water with a big oversized helmet and did welding. He was actually a diver on the construction of the Seabrook power plant years ago. A little piece of irony, actually, a bit of a funny story. I was meeting my wife's family about a year after we were dating or so, and her aunt, who now lives in Hudson River Valley of New York, said, "Oh, we love New Hampshire. You know, I actually went to Dartmouth." And I said, "Oh, that's great. Yeah, you know, that's amazing. It's a beautiful state. We love it in New Hampshire." And she said, "You know, my biggest moment, though, was when I got arrested for protesting the construction of the Seabrook power plant." I said, "Well, you know, my dad helped build it." And she said, "Well, let's see if we can get along." And so they met a few years later at our wedding, and they got along just fine. But really a lot of history there. And, you know, we moved around a lot as a kid. We moved 13 times by the time I was 10, you know, really in a number of different places. And what, you know, both within the United States, but also internationally. We lived even in Venezuela for a period of time when I was younger. Okay, sorry, Paul. I saw a note from you. I don't know if that was meant for me or not, but So we actually moved around a lot. So spent some time in Venezuela and places. And when you live in a different country as a kid, it really makes you appreciate your own country. You don't get the Red Sox down in Caracas, but you do see the President of the United States. You do see the value system that we have in America. You do see the appreciation for diversity. You see the fact that we all have participation in our republic, which is so important. And so always had a great, deep fascination with what really makes our country so special and so great. I went to college in New Jersey. I went to Rutgers University. And then actually that was a chance to work for a Republican governor who got elected at that point. So I worked for Governor Chris Christie full-time while I was in college, working throughout school, and then moved back up to New Hampshire right after college, where I became executive director of the Republican Party, working out of Concord while living in Manchester. Then had an amazing opportunity after working through the presidential cycle to go down to the State Department. Served as senior advisor in the State Department, where I was able to get involved in a whole host of issues. Actually worked on the confirmation hearing for Ambassador Friedman to Israel. Among them, was there when there was discussions taking place about how the new administration was going to potentially change its approach towards both Palestine and Israel, as well as what actions could be taken to try to bring about peace within the region. We were there when we talked about reevaluating the contribution to UNRWA, the UN Human Rights, Refugees and Workers Association, because we were trying to figure out whether the contribution was being utilized in a way that actually advanced the goals that were necessary to bring about that peace in the Mideast. We saw the fact that we, got out of the Iran nuclear deal, a deal which, in my opinion, did nothing to actually truly stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon down the road. It did absolutely nothing to stop them from funding militia activity in the Mideast through paramilitary activity that did target our ally Israel, as well as American troops. From there, I was able to also go on and become chief of staff in our global health office. I was actually chief of staff to Dr. Deborah Birx, someone we've all gotten to know now as the coronavirus coordinator. But back then, we were implementing our global HIV program, and we worked alongside other experts like Dr. Fauci on this. It was a program that was started in 2003 at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where at the outset of the crisis, you had over 30 million people who were HIV positive, yet less than 50,000 of them were on this life-saving treatment we had access to here in the United States, as well as in much of the developed world. Because the program was set up so that you could measure the impact of the dollar of your investment to an outcome, you now have seen that program save over 15 million lives. And at the time I was there, we were able to work with the private sector and bring them in to improve performance. We were able to work with communities of faith, as well as other non-governmental organizations, to improve the performance of our programs at the very small site level, at a very granular level. The other thing we were able to do was actually get the program reauthorized. When I took over that job, we were coming up about a year outside of authorization. We had a lot of folks, Republicans and Democrats, who had been around the program for a long time, as well as those on the Hill who said we were crazy to try to get reauthorized in the political climate. They said, just run it off the books. Programs in government happen all the time. But myself and Dr. Birx both thought that it kind of, you need to have buy-in from the executive and the legislative branch in order to actually run a program well, especially that's so big and so intricate on the global scale. And so we pushed forward for a reauthorization anyway. And we were actually able to bring a liberal Democrat and a conservative Republican together as sponsors of that bill. And we got the thing reauthorized unanimously just days before Congress adjourned for that session. And I think it just shows that if you have the mindset and the willpower to actually get something done in DC, you can. You can get it done, and you can do it in a way that is bipartisan. If you're willing to actually bring people together and let themselves see the best in those ideas. When I decided to leave, I came back home and started my own small business based here in Bedford, my own small consulting shop. Wife and I got married, life was great. And then I got ticked off enough eventually about what I saw going on in Congress. Saw the games that are being played, saw the partisanship at display. I remember Congressman Pappas, 2 years ago, campaigned as this very middle of the road guy, right? So he was going to bring people together, said he was going to stand up to his party leadership when he could, said he may actually oppose Nancy Pelosi as speaker, and unfortunately did none of that. So by the time I'd gone in January, I'd already seen a full year of his voting record, and he had voted with Nancy Pelosi, his party leader, 100% of the time. And I just thought that's not the type of representation we need. He had actually told a lot of folks in my town, in Bedford, small business owners, that he would support a bunch of their issues when he was trying to get their vote 2 years ago, but then he voted diametrically the opposite on the floor just last year. And when they called him up and they asked him why, he said, because my party leadership needed my vote. A few months later, we saw votes around issues of law enforcement. And so, he was endorsed by the State Troopers Association, by 2 of Manchester's police unions. They asked him around that time, how are you going to vote on this issue? He said, well, I'm going to think about it. He then voted to strip away qualified immunity, which is a key provision that protects law enforcement and their families from frivolous lawsuits from the from the criminals that they seek to arrest. When they called him up, they said, why? He said, well, because my party leadership needed my vote. I didn't think the bill would become law anyway. And so you hear that over and over and over again. In my view, that's just exactly what's wrong down Washington, D.C. It's why we're not seeing anything getting done right now when we're trying to get additional COVID relief. It's why we're not seeing anything get done right now when we're talking about how do we build our economy back and also take on the health challenges that we have right now to get through the other side of the pandemic. These are things that should be able to unite us as Americans. I got to tell you, the same way we took that approach to our global HIV program, we can take the same exact approach to COVID-19. Ramp up testing and diagnostics. Make sure that we're ramping up our investment in new and better therapies. Continue to invest at rapid speeds for a safe and effective and reliable vaccine. And then what we can do is bring ourselves together and get our economy going. Be there for our small business owners. Be there for our working class families. And so I just think we can bring that approach down Washington, D.C. I think we can get a lot of really good work done. But we need to have new leadership down there in order to do it. And we need to have people who are willing to represent New Hampshire and not just their party interests at any given moment to get it done. But I definitely appreciate, again, the opportunity to speak with all you and look forward to any and all questions that you have.
Wonderful. If you were in the Congress right now, there are different proposals related to COVID-19 that are kicking around from both houses and the administration. Which provisions do you think are the most important that you would be willing to support?
Sure. I think there's one that's really simple that we could get done right now. And I think if we actually were to be willing to throw out, all the pieces everyone disagrees on, you could get this done with almost 435 votes in the House. And that's to reopen access to the Paycheck Protection Program. You have over $100 billion right now, $100 billion sitting around unutilized from the last round of PPP. Because that was at a time when everyone was only able to get access to 8 weeks. Everyone says they support this. Yet right now it's being held up despite the fact that we have small businesses that need that funding because no one can agree on a whole bunch of ancillary issues. I would put that as a standalone vote today. And in fact, there's an ability to do that. There's something called a discharge petition available right now that if it could get bipartisan signers, you could take that piece of legislation, bring it to the floor and vote on it as a standalone bill. Any member of Congress right now, including Congressman Pappas, could do that right this very moment. And yet, unfortunately, Congressman Pappas isn't doing that and too many other people aren't, despite the fact that there's bipartisan agreement on it. I'm really concerned for the restaurant and hospitality industry. Weather's getting colder. We were fortunate that we had a really good summer. We were able to cope. You had businesses that were beginning to make up a little bit of that loss from, that they lost from March to June. But it's going to slow down dramatically at a time when it's going to be harder and harder for people to be dining indoors. And so I think it's opening up that provision for Paycheck Protection Program. The other reason, by the way, it could be so easy, so the money's already appropriated. This is $100 billion that's already been appropriated by Congress and sitting there right now, unutilized and untapped. This is something that can be done right now and should be done right now. And I think it's really a failure of Congress that hasn't gotten done.
One of the keystone facets of the pandemic is schools. When schools are not open, it affects, obviously, kids directly. It affects their parents, whether they're working parents or not, whether it's two parents working or a single parent. There are, of course, complicated issues around the willingness and the risks to staff who work in schools. There's so many ways in which that one decision or that one reality ripples out. How do you think about that, and what kinds of things could the federal government be doing, or should not the federal government be doing about that, whether it's through money and investment or through informal ways of convening people together?
Sure. Well, I do think it's important to allow a lot of these decisions to be made at the state and the local level. And I say that because the pandemic is having a different impact on everyone based on geography, based on society, based on communities. So it's important that while guidance can be provided for every scenario, I do think you have to leave those decisions to the state and the local school boards in order to make the decision that's in the best interest. Because by the way, that's going to allow you to take teacher input, parent input, as well as student input into the process, which is really important. So I think the governor has done a good job at working with local school boards to make the determination that's best for them. I do think it's important for us to find a safe way to protect everyone's health, but also get students back into school. I mean, I'm really concerned as I've spoken to parents who are really worried about some of their children falling behind in these 100% virtual classrooms. It is just a different learning system. It's a different way to engage the students on learning. You are going to start seeing, unfortunately, some students fall behind the curriculum because they don't have that in-person interactivity with the teacher or even with their classmates. And so I do think we should be encouraging school districts to find ways to safely get some sort of in-person learning. I think there's a really important cognitive development that happens when you have students in those scenarios. And then we also have to make sure that we are providing the resources in order to do that safely. I mean, I've said pretty vocally that it's a disagreement I have with the administration right now. I think FEMA should be reimbursing school districts for PPE supplies. I think that's a expenditure that's been outlaid because of an emergency crisis. The same way that anytime we've had an emergency declaration in the past for any sort of other sort of natural catastrophe or what have you, FEMA is there to reimburse for that. I think that's an important piece as well. I think they should reimburse for school districts to buy that equipment because that's going to allow them then, without feeling that budget crunch that they're all so concerned about, to get students back into schools, at least in some form, which I think is going to make for better educational outcomes as the year progresses.
Sort of related on healthcare, the Affordable Care Act is an area of controversy right now. It will either be upheld or not in the Supreme Court in the coming months. And depending on the makeup of the Congress, different provisions or all of it might remain law or might be repealed. The issue of pre-existing conditions coverage is one that a lot of people here have been asking about. If there were no Affordable Care Act framework, what would be the way? Would you think that everybody with pre-existing conditions should have the same low cost or equal cost access to insurance? And if you did, what would be an alternative way to actually pay for that?
Sure, it's a great question, one that obviously we spent quite a bit of time talking about. If you go back when it was all passed, Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, however you want to refer to it, the reason I was opposed to the way it was done is because it actually disproportionately hurt a lot of states, including New Hampshire. We had a limited number of insurers. We had less access because of that for, middle income families who were on certain plans. Some of those plans were removed. I was just talking to a woman the other day who just said she was dying to have her old healthcare plan back that she lost 7 years ago, or about 6 years ago now. Also, you have seen dramatic increases in premium costs because of Obamacare. I mean, I was talking to another woman out on the Seacoast. She said for the first time in her life, just last December, she was laid off from a company she'd been working at for a long time. She started her own sole proprietorship. She went out to go purchase health insurance. She had only could find a high deductible plan that cost $500 a month, actually it was over $500 a month for a high deductible plan. The same plan that she said 6 years ago would have cost half that. So I do think there's been a lot of unintended consequences that have driven up premium costs because of the passage of that bill. Now, with that said, a lot of folks are relying on it right now. And so I would never want to see it pulled away without a solid replacement put in place. And that replacement would have to cover pre-existing conditions, in my opinion. I think it's really important. People shouldn't be judged just because they're having a health ailment about whether they have access to affordable health care or not. So protecting pre-existing conditions and patients with pre-existing conditions is very important. But then we also have to be talking about a bunch of things that truly actually lower the cost of healthcare. We're a state where the backbone of our economy is made up of small businesses. Buying healthcare as a small business is almost cost prohibitive right now. And I can tell you, I've got my own sole proprietorship myself. I was looking out there for healthcare plans. It is an expensive process. We do have to find different solutions on that to expand access for those who work for small businesses, whether it's a tax credit to small businesses with a certain number of employees or less, so they can give either healthcare stipends or afford to purchase more better access. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was coming back from a late night on the campaign trail, stopped off at T-Bones which is right down the street from where I live. I had a quick bite to eat at the bar. Restaurant was closing, go to pay, and a couple young folks are walking out at the same time. And one guy goes, "I voted for you. You're great. I love you. It's great," which felt really good. The second friend said, "I'm middle of the road and I have a question for you." And so I said, "Yeah, let's talk." And so it's 10 o'clock at night, standing at T-Bones, right as, you know, the restaurant's trying to close and the waitress is looking at you kind of funny because she wants to close up and pay the bill. But we had a conversation about healthcare for about half an hour. And he's got his own small business. It's an iPhone repair shop. And he said the biggest challenge he's having right now is that he can't keep employees because he can't give as grand of a healthcare plan as some of the larger companies do. And he says he's talked to other small business owners who have the same problem. So that's really affecting them all. And so I think proposing a tax credit for small businesses is a way forward on that. We also have to continue to allow an individualized healthcare. I think we should be increasing the tax deductibility for health savings accounts, let folks continue to use a nest egg for routine healthcare costs, or as well as potentially catastrophic costs. And we do need to provide additional access to community healthcare plans and association healthcare plans that small businesses can then also pull their resources into. Those are a few things I think will help provide a pathway forward, in addition to the fact that we need to drive down the overall cost of healthcare. We should have price transparency. Right now, folks can be paying anywhere from $700 to $3,200 for an MRI. People need to start knowing how much they're paying and how much their health insurers are paying for these different procedures or routine exams. That's going to go a long way to helping drive down the cost of healthcare, which is then going to allow us to provide cheaper healthcare insurance.
What do you think about red flag laws or particular kinds of those types of either background checks that are a little more restrictive or things like that relating to gun ownership?
Yeah, I think here in New Hampshire, we do it right. I mean, we actually have some of the least restrictive laws, yet we have one of the safest states because we have a culture of responsible gun ownership. And so I think we do it right here. I think the governor was right to make the vetoes he did. Again, because I think there's a lot of questions about the constitutionality of those ideas anyway. And I'm not sure that we have seen any sufficient evidence that it would actually reduce gun violence anyway. So I would oppose those measures, in part because I don't think they work, in part because it's also unconstitutional, in my opinion.
So your work in the State Department is really, really interesting that you've mentioned, and we've seen these remarkable agreements between Israel and a couple of the Gulf states. I'm curious from your vantage point in the State Department, what you think about the fact that some of these agreements are with governments that are not democracies in any way, and just kind of in the long term, do you see that there's a kind of trend toward those alliances being positive toward both for the United States generally, for Israel generally, for democracy generally in the Middle East?
Well, you know, look, I think ideally we would love everywhere to have a flourishing democracy, but working within the framework of what's realistic as well. I think our first goal has to be stability. And that means stability for Israel. That means stability for the rest of the region, provide stability for us as well. And so I think I'm really glad to see the movement forward between Bahrain and the Emiratis with Israel. I think those two agreements show that there is a framework that's possible for actually aligning allies of ours, you know, folks that we have good working relationships and in many scenarios, into countering the balance of Iran. I mean, I think we have to be very, very cognizant of the fact that Iran is the enemy in the Mideast. It just is. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. You can talk about whether we should improve relationships with Iran. Ideally, we'd all love to have improved relationships, right? We want to, but I think in order to have Iran actually try to reform itself, you're going to have to develop a system with our allies that counterbalances their influence in the region around the world. I mean, they still remain the largest state sponsor of terror in the world right now. We still see them propping up militia activity in the Mideast to attack our troops. In order to counterbalance that, we are going to have to work with our other allies in the region. And so I'm really, really glad to see the progress that's been made. By the way, I'll tell you, there was a lot of, you know, I like to call the foreign policy establishment in DC the blob. You know, they kind of all have one singular thinking process. You know, it was one of the biggest things when I was at the State Department I saw. I mean, I've never met a more arrogant group of people than folks who claim to work in foreign policy in Washington, D.C. Everyone thinks they know how everything works. And yet all they traditionally do is borrow ideas off of each other and repeat them to become conventional wisdom. And so when you did see the administration move the embassy to Jerusalem, everyone said the sky was going to fall, right? Like everyone said, this is going to move peace and stability out of the picture. You're just going to drive uncertainty in the region. You're going to try to actually, you're going to undermine our ability to have any sort of peace, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we've seen the total opposite of that happen. The total opposite of that happen. I think it does show the importance of holding up your alliances, even when, the quote unquote experts say that you shouldn't. And so I think by showing our strength, the unrelenting resolve of our alliance with Israel, that like we did when we moved the embassy, and then showed our other allies that we have good working relationships with in the region, that we're not going to back down from that alliance, that we are going to continue to strengthen it, that we're serious about our word when we say that we actually do have a special relationship. And so I think that's why you've seen the progress that's been made in the past, couple of years towards aligning ourselves and making Israel a part of that counterbalancing structure along with other allies. I mean, I think you're actually going to see potentially some really strong progress made even with the Saudis here in the coming years. I think there's a willingness there to engage. And I think that's all because they see the importance of counterbalancing Iran's influence in the region.
In your introduction, you used the term Palestine in referring to some of the work that you were able to observe or be connected to, and you don't often hear that term used to describe the territories and the regime coming on more on the political right. And I'm curious if you have any insight into how the planners in the administration think about the West Bank in particularly, and how you think about it. Do you think about it as a state of Palestine? I know that was the term that was mentioned over and over in Jared Kushner's plans. And is that how you see it, or do you see it differently in terms of the status there and the relationship with Israel?
Well, I do believe that Israel has a right to be claiming the territory that it does. I also think, though, that in order to actually have any sort of movement towards a longstanding peace agreement, you have to see the PLO actually take real action to show that they are serious about, reducing the support for unrest in the region. And I don't think we've seen that quite yet. I also think, though, that what you've seen is a lot of other Arab nations kind of become frustrated by their activity. I think it's why you've seen the Emiratis and Bahrain actually come to the table and say, we're going to engage with Israel finally. I think they're tired of kind of, how do I say this in a way that's, somewhat politically correct? I think what they feel like they're constantly being taken for a ride in discussions, and that, the Palestinians are using them sometimes as a fallback to prevent progress. And so I think what you've seen is Bahrain and the Emiratis actually, as well as I think you're going to see a couple other nations move in this direction, start recognizing the fact that we need to find a real new way forward. I think that's going to be by a peace process that's really driven, but primarily by our interest in working with supporting Israel, because they are the functioning democracy. They are the peaceful democracy in the region. We need to support them. They are an institution who do want stability and peace in the region. They have a vested stake in that. And so I think you're going to see a lot of other countries begin to come to the table with that understanding as well.
The summer's racial justice protests and issues, both particularly around law enforcement, but just generally on race relations, have catalyzed a lot of discussion and a lot of reflection, even just at a community level before any actions. I'm wondering if there's any ways in which you're looking at things differently, or have been asking yourself more about these issues the past 6 months, or if there's any conversations you've had or things that you've read in the past 6 months that are different than how you've been thinking about this before.
Look, I think we're always concerned anytime there's a group of people that feels like they're not part of the fabric of American society, that they're not part of this belief that we have American exceptionalism, that we do have the ability of the American dream. I mean, that's really the core, in my opinion, of what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of folks who don't feel like they're part of that. And so you got to have an open mind and an open ear when you do that. You want to condemn acts of racism, condemn acts of violence. We need to do that. And, it's something I've had no problem doing. And by the way, that goes into the increasing number of anti-Semitic driven violence that we've seen. The number of shootings at synagogues we've seen, the number of additional acts of violence, whether it was in New York, New Jersey, and Jersey City, as well as some other places, is really, really concerning. And so I think we do have to unequivocally speak out when we see those acts of racism and violence and prejudice. But at the same point, while we're having that conversation about what we can do to become a more inclusive society, well, we are having the conversation about what we've done to reform, in this scenario of policing practices in parts of the country. We have to do it recognizing that that's not necessarily an issue that we see all across the country. Look, there's some reforms that can be made in policing. There's always ways to improve it. I've had conversations with law enforcement about that extensively, and they'll even agree to it. But what we saw in June, unfortunately, was a politically motivated reaction that then condemned law enforcement. And that just makes the job that much more difficult. I mean, I was talking to a couple of police chiefs. They said in COVID, we were treated as heroes. And then all of a sudden we were derided and degraded by the same communities. It's really a shame. These are tough jobs. We're asking law enforcement to do more and more. They're now focusing on issues of addiction. They're focusing on homelessness. They're focusing on mental health challenges, a whole bunch of things. And yet now you have a lot of people who are trying to tell them to do it with less. You have a lot of people who are trying to tell them they should do it without the legal protections that they should have. That's going to make their job much more difficult. And so what I would like to see instead, and it's why I've been so vocally supportive of law enforcement, because I know how hard these jobs are. And if we want to prevent a large mass resignation of cops in our country, we have to stand by law enforcement. Because a lot of them don't feel like their back is being had by the people who are asking them to do the job anymore. They really don't. The number of cops who told me our goal is to recruit good cops. We want to recruit good people into the force. Yet it's so hard right now because of the political dynamics, because of the political culture right now, because of the toxicity of the conversation, that recruiting good people is that much more difficult. That's not good for any of us because we all rely on good, well-trained police forces to keep our communities safe. And so that's why I've been so vocally supportive of law enforcement, while also saying we can have conversations about how to improve it. While we can actually talk about the challenges and the real problems that exist in individual police departments around the country. Now here in New Hampshire, we're really fortunate. I'm not saying everything's perfect, but you're talking about when you talk about all the reforms that have been discussed down in Washington, D.C., a lot of them are already done here. We have community policing that's put in place. Most of our large cities are accredited. We can expand accreditation to smaller police departments as well. Our large ones are already accredited right now. You have police departments that go through the same training academies. So you don't have turf wars that develop the way you do in a lot of other jurisdictions and states. You actually have a police that have not been taught to use chokeholds in over 30 years here in New Hampshire. So all these things are being talked about down in DC, all of them, or a lot of them are already being done here in New Hampshire. And so I think that's what differentiates me and Congressman Pappas is that if I was in that position, I'd say, come to New Hampshire and see a model for the country, not how do I jump in because it's politically convenient to do so and vote for something which would absolutely undermine the ability for law enforcement to do their job in our country. Sorry, Rabbi, you're muted. There we go.
Yes, we've come to the end of our time with you, and we really want to say thank you, both for the time you've taken with us, for your public service to now, and for your willingness to seek this job representing us and taking the time to come to the people and ask for our support. We wish you a good luck and a good day.
Great, Rabbi, I appreciate it. And, I know we didn't get to a chance to get to too many questions, so it's okay. I'm just going to give everyone a phone number and email. Please feel free to reach out at any time. Email is really easy. It's just mm@mattmowers.com. That goes straight to me. Send along any other thoughts you have. And my cell phone is 603-932-8424. So 932-8424, but reach out anytime.
Thank you. I'm sure Don is going to want to say some things maybe to conclude. I just want to say first of all, thank you for this opportunity to do this on your behalf. Second, to remind people to vote if you haven't done that or made plans to vote that. And third, just to say how refreshing and cleansing it is to be in just a normal political debate right now. And as much as anything, our ability to do this and to have conversations with people of different views and to do that civilly and peacefully is really important. And the Men's Club has always played that role. And I'm really appreciative on behalf of the community for what you have done to establish this tradition, which is a very big strength of not only this Jewish community, but this wider community.
Yes. I'd like to thank Rabbi John and all the candidates for an interesting and educational morning. We wish you all well in your political aspirations. The next Jewish Men's Club Zoom event is on Sunday, November 15th, and is co-sponsored by the TBA Programming Committee. Our board member, Paul Moverman, will be our guest speaker, sharing his fascinating genealogical journey. Details will be on the temple calendar soon. We are looking forward to seeing everyone then. Thank you, and please don't